Hello, welcome. I know a lot of you put this on to sleep. Maybe you're lying in bed right now, lights off, phone glowing softly in your hand. That's okay. I'm here with you. Before we begin, I want to mention something. This channel isn't monetized. There are no ads to interrupt you, no jarring sounds to pull you out of wherever your mind goes. So if this helps you, if my voice becomes part of your night, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed. It costs nothing, and it helps more than you know. Also, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I like knowing you're out there, scattered across the world, all of us awake when we probably shouldn't be. All right, let's begin. I grew up in a house where my bedroom window faced the neighbor's yard. Not unusual, I know. Most houses are like that. But our neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, kept her curtains open at night. Always. Every single night for the 12 years we lived there. Her living room glowed with this pale yellow light, and you could see right inside if you looked. I was 7 when I started noticing her routine. She'd sit in the same chair, this old recliner positioned directly in front of the window, and she'd just sit there, knitting, sometimes, reading, occasionally. But mostly, she'd just sit with her hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing in particular. My mom said she was lonely. Her husband had died before we moved in, and she never had kids, so I didn't think much of it. Lonely old lady. Harmless. When I was 9, I started waving to her. I don't know why. Probably just being a friendly kid. I'd look out my window before bed, see her sitting there, and I'd wave. She never waved back, never even looked in my direction. My mom said maybe her eyesight was bad. That made sense. By the time I was 12, waving to Mrs. Callahan had become this automatic thing. Brush teeth, put on pajamas, wave to Mrs. Callahan. Get into bed, like a ritual. And she was always there. Same chair, same position. The constancy was almost comforting in a weird way, like knowing the sun would come up. Then one night, I remember it was a Thursday because I had a math test the next day. I looked out my window, and she wasn't there. The chair was empty. The light was still on, but the chair was empty. I felt this strange little drop in my stomach. Like I'd missed a step going downstairs. I told myself she'd probably just gone to the bathroom or to bed early. But I kept looking out the window every few minutes. I couldn't focus on studying. The empty chair bothered me more than it should have. Around 10:30, I looked again, still empty. I went to bed, uneasy. The next morning, I asked my mom if she knew if Mrs. Callahan was okay. She gave me this odd look and said, "Why are you asking about her?" "I just noticed she wasn't in her chair last night," I said. My mom got very quiet. Then she said, "Honey, Mrs. Callahan died 4 months ago. I felt all the air leave my lungs." "What?" "There was a small funeral. I went." "I thought I told you, but I've been seeing her," I said. My voice sounded far away. "Every night. She's always in her chair." My mom looked at me like I'd said something deeply concerning. "Sweetie, no one's been living in that house since March. It's been empty." I went upstairs. My hands were shaking. I looked out my window in full daylight for the first time in years. Really looked. Not just a glance before bed. The chair was gone. The living room was completely empty. No furniture, nothing. But I had seen her. I had seen someone in that chair every single night. I was sure of it. That night, I forced myself to look out the window before bed. The house was dark, empty. I didn't wave. But as I was climbing into bed, I glanced back one more time, and the light was on, pale yellow, just like always. And the chair was back, and she was sitting in it, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. Only this time, her head turned, slowly, and she looked directly at my window. And she waved. I never looked out that window again. I kept my curtains closed for the next 6 years, until I left for college. My parents thought it was a phase, some teenage preference for privacy. I never corrected them. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear this soft tap, tap, tap on the glass, like fingernails. Gentle, patient. I never opened the curtains to check. When I was in college, I had this friend named Erin. We met freshman year in a philosophy class and became close pretty quickly. He was smart, funny, a little anxious, but in a relatable way. We'd study together, get late-night food, all the usual college stuff. Sophomore year, Erin started acting strange. He'd space out mid-conversation, like his mind had just left his body for a few seconds. He'd forget things we'd talked about an hour earlier. At first, I thought he was just stressed or smoking too much weed, but it got worse. One night, we were walking back from the library, and he suddenly stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. Just froze. "Aaron," I said. He didn't respond. He was staring at a streetlight with this blank expression. "Dude, you okay?" After a long moment, he blinked and looked at me like he'd just woken up. "What? You zoned out." "Did I?" He seemed genuinely confused. It kept happening. Sometimes, multiple times a day, he'd lose minutes, sometimes longer. He went to a doctor, got some tests done. They said it might be absence seizures, and put him on medication. It didn't help. Spring semester, Aaron stopped going to most of his classes. I'd check on him, and he'd be in his dorm room, sitting on his bed, staring at the wall. "I keep losing time," he told me once. His voice was flat. "I'll be doing something, and then suddenly it's hours later, and I don't remember anything. Have you told your doctor?" They don't believe me. They think I'm making it up or having panic attacks. I didn't know what to say. Then one day, Aaron asked me something that made my skin crawl. "Do you ever feel like you're not alone in your own head?" "What do you mean?" He looked at me with these hollow eyes, like someone else is in there with you, watching, waiting for you to let your guard down so they can take over. I suggested he see a therapist. He nodded, but I don't think he ever went. Near the end of the semester, Aaron stopped answering my texts. I went to his dorm. His roommate said he'd basically been catatonic for days, just lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. I walked in. Aaron was exactly as described, lying on his back, eyes wide open, not blinking. "Aaron," nothing. I got closer. His eyes didn't move, didn't track me. It was like looking at a mannequin. I shook his shoulder. "Aaron, can you hear me?" And then he sat up, smoothly. Too smoothly, like he was being pulled upright by strings. He turned his head toward me, and his face was completely blank. No recognition, no emotion. "Aaron?" He smiled, but it wasn't Aaron's smile. It was too wide, too empty. "He's not here right now," Aaron's voice said, but it didn't sound like him. The cadence was wrong. The tone. I backed away. "What the fuck? He'll be back," the voice continued, still wearing that awful smile. "He always comes back. We take turns." I left. I ran out of that room and didn't stop until I was outside. I reported it to the RA, said I thought Aaron was having a mental health crisis. They got him to a hospital. I don't know what happened after that. He withdrew from school, and I never saw him again. But about a year later, I got a message from him on Facebook. Just one line. It's my turn again. For now. I never responded. I thought about blocking him, but something stopped me. Every few months, I get another message. Always short. Always unsettling. He's getting stronger. I'm losing more time. I don't think I'm me anymore. The last one came 3 weeks ago. I can't remember my name. I still don't know what to do. My older sister went missing when I was 11. She was 16. One day she was there. The next day she wasn't. No note. No signs of struggle. She'd gone to bed like normal, and in the morning her bed was empty and her window was open. The police searched everywhere. Dogs, volunteers, helicopters. They dredged the lake, checked the woods, interviewed everyone she knew. Nothing. She'd vanished. My parents never recovered. My mom became a ghost in her own house, wandering from room to room, like she was searching for something she'd lost but couldn't remember what. My dad threw himself into work and stopped talking about her entirely. It was like we'd all silently agreed to pretend she'd never existed, because acknowledging the empty space was too painful. I was the only one who kept her room exactly the way it was. I'd go in there sometimes and just sit on her bed, trying to remember what her voice sounded like. 5 years after she disappeared, I was 16, the same age she'd been. I was lying in bed one night, unable to sleep, when I heard something. A knock, soft, hesitant. It was coming from my bedroom door. "Yeah," I called out. The door opened slowly, and my sister walked in. She looked exactly the same. Same hair, same face, same clothes she'd been wearing the night she disappeared. An old band t-shirt and pajama pants. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "Hey," she said quietly. "Emma?" She nodded and sat down on the edge of my bed, right where she used to sit when she'd come talk to me before bed. "Where have you been?" My voice cracked. "Everyone's been looking for you." She looked at me with this sad, tired expression. I don't know how to explain it. Try. I'm not really here. I mean, I am, but I'm not. I don't understand. I got lost, she said. That night, I don't remember how, but I ended up somewhere else. Somewhere that looks like here, but isn't. And I've been trying to find my way back ever since. I reached out to touch her hand. It was cold, solid, real. "You're here now," I said. "We can go wake up Mom and Dad." "No." She pulled her hand away. "They won't see me. Only you can." "That doesn't make sense." "I know." She looked down. "I can only stay for a few minutes. It takes a lot of energy to get here." "Where do you go when you leave?" She hesitated. "The place. I'm stuck. It looks like our house, but everything's slightly wrong. The furniture's in different places. The pictures on the walls are of people I don't recognize. And I'm alone. Always alone." Tears were streaming down my face. "How do I help you?" "I don't know if you can." She looked at me, and her eyes were so sad. "But I need you to know I didn't run away. I didn't leave on purpose. I got lost, and I can't find my way back." "I'll find you," I said. "I'll figure out how." She smiled, but it was heartbreaking. "I miss you. I miss you too." She stood up. "I have to go. Wait." But she was already fading. Not dramatically, not like a ghost in a movie, just becoming less solid, less there, like she was being tuned out, frequency by frequency, until she was gone. I sat in my bed shaking, crying, not sure if I'd hallucinated the whole thing. But on my nightstand, there was something that hadn't been there before. A hair tie. The one she always wore. The purple one with the little metal clasp that was slightly bent. She's visited me 7 times since then, never on a predictable schedule, sometimes months apart, sometimes weeks. Each time, she looks a little more tired, a little more faded. Last time, she told me she'd seen something in that place she's trapped in. Someone else, or something else. She wouldn't describe it, but I could tell it terrified her. "I think it knows I've been leaving," she whispered. "I think it's been following me. To here." She nodded. "What does it want?" "I don't know, but I think it wants to trade places." She left before I could ask what that meant. That was 2 months ago. She hasn't come back since. But sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps in the hallway outside my room. Slow, deliberate. They stop outside my door. I never open it, because the footsteps are too heavy to be my sister's. I work as a paralegal at a small law firm. Boring, mostly. Contracts, real estate closings, occasional estate work. Last year, we took on the estate of a man named Leonard Voss. He died alone in his house. Natural causes, heart attack. No family, no will. The state needed someone to inventory and liquidate his assets. My boss sent me to the house to document everything. It was a small, outdated ranch-style place on the edge of town. Vinyl siding, overgrown yard, the kind of house you'd drive past and never think about twice. I let myself in with the key the estate lawyer provided. The inside was exactly what you'd expect from an elderly man living alone. Outdated furniture, yellowing walls, stacks of old newspapers. It smelled like dust and something faintly sour. I started in the living room, photographing and cataloging. TV, couch, coffee table, lamps, standard stuff. Moved to the kitchen, more of the same. Then I went down the hallway toward the bedrooms. There were 3 doors. 2 were open. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. The 3rd was closed. I opened it. It was a child's bedroom. I stopped in the doorway, confused. The room was pristine, like it had been frozen in time. A small bed with a blue comforter. Toys neatly arranged on shelves. Posters of cartoons from the 80s on the walls. A wooden toy chest at the foot of the bed. But everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. Leonard Voss didn't have children. The estate documents were clear on that. Never married. No kids. So whose room was this? I took photos, feeling increasingly uneasy. I opened the closet. Children's clothes, size maybe 6 or 7, hanging neatly. I checked the toy chest, stuffed animals, action figures, a few books. On the nightstand there was a framed photo. I picked it up. It was a picture of a young boy, maybe 6 years old, smiling at the camera. He was standing in a yard. This yard, I realized, recognizing the house in the background. I turned the frame over. On the back, written in faded ink, Daniel, age 6, 1982. I put the photo down and left the room, closing the door behind me. I finished the inventory quickly and got out of there. Back at the office, I asked my boss if he knew anything about Leonard Voss having a kid. No, he said, frowning. Why? I told him about the room. He pulled up the estate file and went through it carefully. No mention of children anywhere. No birth certificates. No custody documents. Nothing. Maybe a nephew, he suggested, Or he fostered a kid at some point. Maybe. But it bothered me. The room was too personal, too carefully preserved to be for a nephew or a foster kid who was only there temporarily. I tried searching public records for Daniel Voss. Nothing came up. Then I tried missing children databases for the early 80s. I filtered by first name and approximate age. I found him. Daniel Howell, age 6, reported missing in August 1982. Last seen playing in his front yard. Never found. I stared at the photo on the missing poster. It was the same kid from the photo in Leonard's house. Same smile. Same everything. My stomach turned. Leonard's house was 3 blocks from where Daniel Howell was last seen. I didn't know what to do with that information. The case was 40 years old. Leonard was dead. There was no one to charge, no one to question. But I couldn't let it go. I went back to the house. I don't know what I was looking for. Closure, maybe. Proof. I went straight to the child's bedroom. I started searching more carefully this time, looking for anything I'd missed. In the back of the closet, behind the clothes, there was a small door, like an access panel to the attic or crawl space. I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to open it. I opened it. Inside was a narrow space, maybe 4 feet high. I had to crouch to fit. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The space was full of boxes. I opened the nearest one. Children's shoes. Different sizes, different styles. I opened another box. Children's clothes. Also different sizes. Another box. Toys. A doll with blank eyes. A wooden train set. A stuffed rabbit with a missing ear. There were 12 boxes total. At the back of the space, almost hidden, was a small metal lockbox. I pulled it out and brought it into the light of the bedroom. It wasn't locked. I opened it. Inside were 12 driver's licenses, not children's IDs, adult licenses. But the photos were all of children, different children, boys and girls, ages ranging from maybe 5 to 10. Each license had a different name, different address, but all from towns within an hour's drive. I searched the names when I got home. All of them were missing children. Cases spanning from 1978 to 1993. All unsolved. I sat in my apartment, shaking, staring at my computer screen. I should have called the police immediately. I know that. But I was terrified. Terrified of what I'd found. Terrified of being connected to it. Terrified of the implications. I went to my boss the next morning and told him I couldn't work on the Voss estate anymore. I said it was a personal conflict. He reassigned it without asking questions. I never told anyone what I found. But 2 weeks later, I got a call from a detective. They'd found the lockbox and the boxes in the crawl space during the estate sale preparation. Someone else had discovered them. I had to give a statement. I told them everything. The investigation's still ongoing. They're trying to identify remains, connect evidence, notify families. But here's the thing that keeps me awake. When I was in that house the second time, after I found the lockbox, I heard something. A sound from another room. A soft sound. Like a child crying. I didn't investigate. I grabbed the lockbox and left. But I heard it. And sometimes, late at night, I still hear it. In my apartment. A soft, distant crying. Like it followed me home. I tell myself it's pipes, or neighbors, or my imagination. But I don't really believe that. In high school, I was part of this friend group. 6 of us, pretty tight-knit. We did everything together. One of the guys, Trevor, was the kind of person who always had to push things further. Dares, pranks, exploring abandoned places. He fed off the adrenaline. Senior year, Trevor found this old service tunnel that ran under part of the town. It had been built decades ago for utility access and mostly forgotten. The entrance was hidden behind a rusted gate in a wooded area near the old water treatment plant. Trevor was obsessed with exploring it. He kept talking about it, showing us photos he'd found online from urban explorer forums. The tunnel stretched for almost 2 miles underground, connecting various points around town. Finally, he convinced 4 of us to go with him. Me, Trevor, and our friends, Caleb, Jess, and Morgan. We went on a Friday night, brought flashlights, told our parents we were sleeping at each other's houses. The entrance was exactly as sketchy as you'd imagine. We had to squeeze through a gap in the gate and climb down a rusted ladder into darkness. The tunnel was narrow, maybe 6 feet wide, with a low concrete ceiling. Water dripped constantly. The air was cold and damp and smelled like mold. Trevor led the way, practically vibrating with excitement. The rest of us were less enthusiastic, but no one wanted to be the one to chicken out. We walked for maybe 20 minutes, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. The tunnel went straight for a long time, then started branching, side passages leading off into darkness. "We should mark our path," Jess said nervously, "so we can find our way back." Trevor laughed. "We're going straight. Can't get lost if we don't turn." But of course Trevor did turn. He took us down a side passage, insisting it would loop back around. It didn't. We ended up in this maze of tunnels, all looking identical. Concrete walls, water-stained ceilings, darkness in every direction. "Okay," Caleb finally said. "This is stupid. We need to go back. Relax," Trevor said. But even he was starting to sound uncertain. We tried to retrace our steps. Took a left, then a right, then another left. But nothing looked familiar. The tunnels all looked the same. Morgan stopped suddenly. "Do you guys hear that?" We all went quiet. At first I didn't hear anything. Then I did. Footsteps. Distant. Echoing. "Someone else is down here," Jess whispered. "Hello?" Trevor called out. His voice bounced off the walls, repeating down the tunnels. The footsteps stopped. We waited. Silence. Then the footsteps started again. Faster. Closer. "Let's go," Caleb said. And we started moving quickly back the way we'd come. Or what we thought was the way we'd come. The footsteps kept pace with us, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. It was impossible to tell in the echoing tunnels. We turned a corner and found ourselves in a slightly larger chamber. 4 tunnels branched off from it. "Which way?" Morgan asked, panicked. We didn't know. The footsteps were getting closer. Trevor picked a tunnel at random, and we ran. Just flat out ran. Flashlights bouncing, breaths echoing. And then Trevor's flashlight went out. "Shh!" he shouted, stumbling. One by one, our flashlights started dying, batteries draining impossibly fast. Soon, we were in complete darkness. We stopped running. We had to. We couldn't see anything. We huddled together, breathing hard, trying not to panic. And then, in the darkness, we heard breathing. Not ours. Something else. Close. "Who's there?" Jess's voice was shaking. The breathing moved, circling us. Someone, something, was in the tunnel with us. Morgan started crying. And then, impossibly, we saw a light. Faint, orange, like a candle or a lantern. It was coming from one of the tunnels. We didn't discuss it. We just moved toward it, desperate. The light led us through the maze. We followed it, not speaking, too afraid to question it. After what felt like hours, we saw the entrance, the ladder leading up. We climbed as fast as we could and burst out into the night air. All 5 of us made it out. We sat in the grass, gasping, shaking. "What the fuck was that?" Caleb said. None of us had an answer. We went home. We didn't talk about it. We made a silent pact to never mention it again. But here's the thing. A week later, Trevor wasn't at school. I texted him. No response. His parents reported him missing the next day. They found his car parked near the entrance to the tunnels. They searched the tunnels for days. Police, search and rescue, volunteers. They never found him. The rest of us were questioned. We told the police we'd been in the tunnels with him weeks before, but hadn't gone back. They couldn't prove otherwise. Trevor's case went cold. But sometimes, late at night, I get messages from his number. Never words, just sounds. Breathing, footsteps, dripping water. I've blocked the number 4 times. It keeps coming back. The last message came 2 days ago. It was a video. I shouldn't have opened it. It was footage from inside the tunnels. Shaky, dark, the camera moving through the passages. And at the end of the video, the camera turned around. Trevor's face filled the screen. But his eyes were wrong. Empty, black. And behind him, in the darkness, I could see shapes, multiple shapes, moving. The video ended. I haven't slept since. My grandmother had dementia. It started slowly, forgetting names, repeating herself, and got worse over about 5 years. By the end, she didn't recognize anyone. She'd talk to people who weren't there. She'd get angry at family members, accusing us of being strangers trying to steal from her. It was heartbreaking. She lived with my parents the last 2 years. I was in college, but I'd come home on weekends to help out. One Saturday, I was sitting with her while my parents ran errands. She was having a bad day, very agitated, mumbling to herself. I was reading, not really paying attention, when she suddenly grabbed my arm. Her grip was strong, urgent. "You have to be careful," she said, looking directly at me. "Careful of what, Grandma? They're listening." "Who's listening?" She looked around the room, fearfully. "The ones who come at night." I assumed she was confused, experiencing delusions. "It's okay. You're safe." "No." She squeezed harder. "They take your memories. They eat them. That's why I can't remember. They've been eating me for years. Grandma, that's not. They'll come for you too, once they know you can see them. See them." She nodded, her eyes suddenly sharp and clear in a way they hadn't been in months. "They're always there, in the corners, in the shadows, waiting." Then, just as quickly, the clarity was gone. Her eyes went foggy again. She let go of my arm and went back to mumbling. I chalked it up to the disease. Paranoid delusions, common in dementia patients. My grandmother died 3 months later, peaceful, in her sleep. At the funeral, my aunt pulled me aside. "Did she ever say anything strange to you?" she asked. "Toward the end, she said a lot of strange things," I replied. "Anything about things in the shadows?" I froze. "Yeah, once." "Why?" My aunt looked uncomfortable. She said the same thing to me, and to your uncle, and apparently to several of the hospice nurses. They all thought she was hallucinating. "She was," I said. "Right. My aunt didn't answer right away. My mother didn't have dementia until she turned 73, she finally said. Before that, she was sharp as a tack, and she used to tell me, when I was a kid, that her mother had said the same thing, about things in shadows that ate memories. Genetic delusion, I suggested. Maybe, but my aunt didn't sound convinced. After the funeral, I tried to forget about it. Grief makes people see patterns that aren't there. But a few weeks later, I was in my apartment late at night, studying for finals. I got up to get water, and when I came back, my notes were wrong. Not gone. Wrong. Words were different. Entire paragraphs I'd written were changed. The handwriting was mine, but the content wasn't what I'd written. I sat there, staring at my notebook, my heart pounding. I told myself I'd misremembered. I was tired, stressed, but then it happened again. And again. Small things, memories that didn't quite line up. Events I was sure had happened one way, but everyone else remembered differently. I started taking photos of things, my notes, my room, time-stamped proof. One night, I took a photo of my desk before going to bed. The next morning, I checked the photo. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was a shadow. But it wasn't a normal shadow. It had a shape. Almost human, but stretched, elongated. And it wasn't in my room when I'd taken the photo. I was sure of it. I looked at the corner where the shadow had been in the photo. Nothing there now. But I felt something. A presence. A weight. I started seeing them after that. Not clearly. Just glimpses, movement in my peripheral vision. Shapes in the dark that disappeared when I looked directly at them. And my memory kept degrading. Little things at first. Where I'd put my keys, what I'd eaten for breakfast. But then, bigger things. Entire conversations I couldn't recall. Days that felt like they were missing chunks. I went to a doctor. They ran tests. Everything came back normal. It's probably stress, the doctor said. Maybe anxiety. I didn't tell her about the shadows. Last week, I woke up and didn't recognize my apartment. It looked familiar, but wrong, like a copy that was slightly off. It took me almost an hour to convince myself it was the same place. I don't know how much longer I have before I lose myself completely. My grandmother was right. They're eating me, and I don't know how to stop them. I think about that a lot. How much of what we remember is real? How much has been changed, slowly, without us noticing? We trust our minds to be accurate records. But what if they're not? What if the things we've forgotten weren't forgotten at all, but taken? You probably think you're safe, lying there in the dark, listening to my voice. But have you checked recently? Really checked? I need to tell you about the apartment I lived in when I was 23. It was in an old building downtown, the kind with high ceilings and radiators that clanged at night. The rent was cheap, which should have been my first clue, but I was broke and desperate, so I signed the lease without thinking twice. The landlord was an older man who didn't say much. He handed me the keys, told me trash day was Thursday, and left. I remember standing in the empty living room that first day, listening to how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. The apartment had been empty for a while. There was a thin layer of dust on everything. And the previous tenant had left behind a few things. A wire hanger in the closet, a wooden spoon in one of the kitchen drawers, a small mirror propped against the baseboard in the bedroom. I didn't think much of it. People leave things behind all the time. I moved my stuff in over the course of a weekend. I didn't have much. A futon, some clothes, a few boxes of books. I set up my laptop on the kitchen counter because I didn't have a desk yet. That first night, I ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor, and I felt okay, hopeful even, like maybe this was the start of something good. But that night, when I tried to sleep, I heard it, a sound. It was faint, coming from somewhere inside the walls. At first, I thought it was pipes. Old buildings make noise, right? But this wasn't the groan of metal or the rush of water. It was rhythmic, a soft, repetitive tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 pause. I lay there listening, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It seemed to move. Sometimes it was near the window. Sometimes it was closer to the closet. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a tree branch against the building. Maybe something in the apartment above me. I pulled the blanket over my head and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I forgot about it. Daylight has a way of making things feel silly. I went to work, came home, made dinner. But that night, the tapping came back. Same rhythm, same slow, deliberate pattern. I got up and walked around the apartment, pressing my ear to the walls, trying to find the source. Nothing. The moment I got close, it would stop. And then, a few minutes later, it would start again from somewhere else. This went on for weeks. I mentioned it to a coworker once, casually, and she laughed and said it was probably a mouse. But I never saw droppings. Never saw any evidence of anything living in the walls. I set traps anyway, just in case. They stayed untouched. One night, I woke up around 3 in the morning, and the tapping was louder than it had ever been. It was coming from inside the bedroom closet. I could hear it so clearly. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, staring at the closet door. It was slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it open. I should have stayed in bed. I should have pulled the covers over my head and waited for morning. But something about the sound made me angry. I was tired. I was exhausted from weeks of broken sleep, and I just wanted it to stop. So I got up, walked over to the closet, and yanked the door open. Nothing. Just my clothes hanging there, swaying slightly from the movement of the door. I stood there for a long time, breathing hard, feeling stupid, and then I noticed something. On the floor of the closet, in the back corner, there was a small door, like a panel. I'd never seen it before. It was painted the same color as the wall, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. I crouched down and touched it. It was wood, old and warped, with a small metal latch. My hand was shaking as I unhooked the latch and pulled the panel open. Inside was a crawl space, dark and narrow, stretching back into nothing. The air that came out was cold and stale, like it had been trapped for years. I used my phone as a flashlight and shined it inside. The space was maybe 2 feet high, just big enough for someone to crouch in. The floor was covered in dust, and there were marks, drag marks, like something had been pulled through. And then I saw it. At the far end of the crawl space, maybe 10 feet back, there was something sitting there. At first, I thought it was a pile of fabric, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was shaped like a person, hunched over, facing away from me. I dropped my phone. The light went out. I scrambled backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I slammed the closet door shut and stood there in the dark, too terrified to move. I didn't hear the tapping anymore. I didn't hear anything, just my own breathing, loud and ragged. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the futon with all the lights on, staring at the closet door. When the sun finally came up, I grabbed my keys and left. I went to a coffee shop and sat there until my hands stopped shaking. I thought about calling the landlord, but what would I say? That I saw something in the crawl space, that I thought someone was living in my walls. I didn't go back to the apartment for 2 days. I stayed with a friend, made up an excuse about the heat being broken, but eventually I had to go back. I had a lease. I had nowhere else to go. And part of me, some stupid, stubborn part of me, wanted to prove to myself that I'd imagined it. When I opened the closet again, the panel was closed, latched, like it had never been opened. I shined my phone light inside the crawl space again, and it was empty. Just dust and darkness. No pile of fabric, no shape, nothing. I told myself I'd been half asleep, that I'd seen shadows and let my imagination run wild. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, that it had been watching me, and that when I left, it had moved. I lived in that apartment for another 6 months. I never heard the tapping again. But sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up with the feeling that someone was standing in my room, just standing there in the dark, waiting for me to open my eyes. I never did. I kept them shut tight and waited for the sun. I moved out as soon as my lease was up. I didn't tell the landlord why. He didn't ask. When I handed him the keys, he looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "Did you ever open the panel?" I stared at him. My mouth went dry. I didn't answer. I just walked away. I don't know what was in that crawl space. I don't know if it was ever really there, but sometimes, even now, I'll be lying in bed in my new place, and I'll hear it, faint and far away, like it's coming from somewhere deep inside the walls. Tap, 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 and I wonder if it followed me. When I was 16, my best friend was a girl named Claire. We'd known each other since middle school, and we were inseparable. The kind of friends who could sit in silence for hours and feel completely comfortable. We had sleepovers every weekend, stayed up late talking about nothing, shared everything. She was shy, quiet, the kind of person who blended into the background at school. But when it was just the two of us, she'd open up. She'd tell me things she didn't tell anyone else. One night, we were at her house, in her bedroom, and she told me something I didn't understand at the time. She said, "I think there's something wrong with me." I laughed because I thought she was joking, but she didn't laugh back. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands, and she looked scared. "What do you mean?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Sometimes I don't remember things. Like whole days. I'll wake up and it's Tuesday, but the last thing I remember is Saturday. And no one else seems to notice. Everyone acts like nothing's wrong." I didn't know what to say. I told her maybe she was stressed, that maybe she was just tired. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't believe me. She looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. We changed the subject, and eventually we fell asleep. A few weeks later, Claire stopped coming to school. Her parents said she was sick, that she needed some time off. I texted her, but she didn't respond. I called, and her mom answered, her voice tight and strange, and she said Claire couldn't come to the phone right now. I asked if I could visit, and she said no, not right now, maybe later. I didn't see Claire for 2 months. When she finally came back to school, she was different, not in a way I could explain. She looked the same clothes, same hair, same quiet smile. But something about her felt wrong. She didn't talk as much. She didn't laugh. When I asked her where she'd been, she just said she'd been sick. and she didn't want to talk about it. I tried to be a good friend. I tried to give her space, but it was hard. She felt like a stranger. We'd sit together at lunch, and she'd stare at her food without eating. And I'd try to start a conversation, and she'd respond with one-word answers. It was like she was somewhere else, like she was looking at me, but not really seeing me. One night, she called me. It was late, after midnight, and I almost didn't answer. But I did. "Can you come over?" she asked. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Now," I said. "Please." I should have said no. I should have told her to wait until morning. But I was worried. So I snuck out of my house and drove to hers. Her parents' car wasn't in the driveway. The house was dark. I texted her, and she told me to come to the back door. She was standing there, waiting for me. She looked pale, thin, like she hadn't been sleeping. She didn't say anything. She just turned and walked into the house, and I followed. We went up to her room, and she closed the door behind us. She sat down on her bed and stared at the floor. I sat next to her and waited. Finally, she spoke. "Do you remember when I told you I was losing time?" she asked. I nodded. "It's getting worse," she said. "I'm losing hours now, sometimes whole days. And when I come back, things are different." "Different how?" I asked. She looked at me, and her eyes were red and glassy, like she'd been crying. "My room," she said. "Things are moved. My clothes are in different drawers. My books are on different shelves, and no one else notices. My parents act like everything's normal." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to help her, but I didn't understand. I asked her if she'd talked to a doctor, and she laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. "They did tests," she said. "Brain scans, blood tests, everything. They said there's nothing wrong with me, but I know something's wrong. I can feel it." She stood up and walked over to her closet. She opened the door and pulled out a cardboard box. She brought it over to the bed and set it down between us. Inside were notebooks, dozens of them. "I started keeping track," she said. "Every day, I write down everything I do. What I eat, what I wear, where I go. And then, when I lose time, I check the notebooks to see what I missed." She opened one of the notebooks and handed it to me. The handwriting was hers, but it was different, messier, more frantic. I flipped through the pages, and my stomach twisted. The entries were strange, disjointed. Some of them didn't make sense. "Woke up in the basement. Don't remember going down there. Found dirt under my fingernails. Haven't been outside. Mom asked me why I was in her room last night. I don't remember being in her room." I looked at Claire, and she was staring at me with this desperate, pleading expression, like she needed me to believe her. And I did. I don't know why, but I did. "What do you think is happening?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't know, but I think when I'm gone, someone else is here. Someone else is in my body." The room felt very cold. "I know how that sounds," she said quickly. "I know, but I can't explain it any other way. It's like there's someone else living my life, and I'm just not there." I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to tell her it was stress or trauma or something explainable, but I couldn't, because as I sat there, looking at her, I realized something. I didn't recognize her, not in that moment. It was like looking at someone wearing Claire's face, the way she held herself, the way she spoke. It was just slightly off, And I felt this creeping, horrible certainty that the person sitting next to me wasn't my friend. I stood up. I told her I had to go, that my parents would notice I was gone. She didn't try to stop me. She just nodded and walked me to the door. As I was leaving, she grabbed my arm. "If I call you again," she said, "and I don't sound like me, don't come." I left. I drove home, and I didn't sleep that night. Claire didn't come back to school after that. A few weeks later, I heard from someone that she'd moved away. Her whole family gone. I tried to find her online, but there was nothing. No social media, no trace, like she'd never existed. I still think about her sometimes. I think about that night and the way she looked at me and the notebooks full of someone else's handwriting. And I think about what she said, "Don't come." I wonder if I ever really knew her at all, or if the person I called my best friend had been someone else the whole time. My dad worked night shifts when I was growing up. He was a security guard at a warehouse on the edge of town, and he'd leave the house around 10 p.m. and come back just before dawn. My mom worked days, so there was always someone home, but there were a few hours in the evening where I'd be alone. I was 12, old enough to take care of myself, and I didn't mind. I liked the quiet. Our house was small, just 3 bedrooms and a kitchen, sitting at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by woods. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. At night it was so dark you couldn't see your hand in front of your face if you stepped outside. I used to think it was peaceful. Now I'm not so sure. One night I was in my room doing homework when I heard a knock at the front door. It was faint, but clear. 3 slow knocks. I froze, my pencil hovering over my notebook. We almost never got visitors, especially not at night. I thought maybe it was a neighbor, someone needing help, or maybe my dad had forgotten his keys. I got up and walked down the hallway to the living room. The front door had a small window at the top, but it was too high for me to see through without standing on something. I called out, "Who is it?" No answer. I waited, my heart beating a little faster. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind, or a branch hitting the door. But then I heard it again. 3 slow knocks. I dragged a chair over to the door and stood on it so I could look through the window. The porch light was on, casting a yellow glow over the front steps. There was no one there. I got down from the chair and stood there, staring at the door. I told myself it was nothing. Some kid playing a prank. Or an animal. I went back to my room and tried to focus on my homework, but I couldn't stop listening, waiting for another knock. It came 20 minutes later. This time, it was louder, more insistent. I got up and went to the door again, and again, there was no one there. But this time, I noticed something. There were footprints on the porch. Wet footprints, like someone had been standing in the rain. But it hadn't rained. The ground was dry. I locked the door and backed away. I thought about calling my dad, but I didn't want to bother him at work. I thought about calling my mom, but she was an hour away. And what would I even say? That someone knocked on the door and left footprints. I turned off the porch light and went back to my room. I locked my bedroom door and sat on my bed, listening. The house was silent. Too silent. I couldn't hear the usual sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards. It was like the house was holding its breath. And then I heard it. A voice. It was faint, coming from somewhere outside. A woman's voice, calling my name. "Michael, Michael, open the door." I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voice was sweet, almost sing-song, but there was something wrong with it, something hollow. "Michael, I know you're in there. Please, I need help." I wanted to believe it was real, that there was someone outside who needed help, but something deep in my gut told me not to open that door, told me that whatever was out there wasn't human. The voice kept calling, over and over, my name echoing through the trees. And then it changed. "Michael, it's Mom. Let me in." I felt cold all over, because it sounded like her. It sounded exactly like my mom. The same tone, the same cadence, but my mom was an hour away. She couldn't be outside. I covered my ears and squeezed my eyes shut. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the voice stopped. The house went silent again. I stayed in my room until I saw headlights through the window, my dad's truck pulling into the driveway. I ran out to meet him, and the second I saw him, I started crying. He held me and asked what was wrong, and I told him everything. He listened, his expression serious, and then he walked around the outside of the house with a flashlight. He checked the porch, the yard, the tree line. He came back and told me there was no one there. No footprints, no signs of anyone. But I knew what I'd heard. I knew what I'd seen. My dad stayed up with me that night, and I finally fell asleep on the couch next to him. The next morning, he didn't go to bed like he usually did. He stayed awake, making phone calls, talking in low voices. I heard him mention something to my mom about moving, but she shut it down. We couldn't afford to move. We were stuck. The knocking didn't happen again. But sometimes, late at night, I'd hear that voice in the distance, calling my name, calling my mom's name, calling my dad's name. It never came close to the house again, but it was always there, somewhere in the woods. We lived in that house for 3 more years. My dad eventually switched to day shifts. We never talked about that night, but I know he believed me, because sometimes when we'd be sitting in the living room in the evening, he'd get this look on his face, like he was listening for something, and he'd get up and check the locks, even though they were already locked. I'm 28 now. My parents still live in that house. I visit them sometimes, but I never stay overnight. And when I leave, when I'm driving down that gravel road, I always check the rearview mirror, just to make sure nothing's following me, because I still hear it sometimes, in my dreams. That voice calling my name, sweet and hollow, like something pretending to be human. And I know, someday, it's going to knock again. I used to work at a call center. It was a terrible job, the kind of place where you sit in a cubicle under fluorescent lights and make outbound sales calls for 8 hours a day. The pay was barely above minimum wage, and the turnover rate was insane. People would last a week, maybe 2, and then disappear. I stuck it out for 6 months, mostly because I needed the money and didn't have any other options. The office was in an old building downtown, the kind with narrow hallways and elevators that groaned when you got in them. Our floor was the 3rd floor, and it was always freezing. Even in the summer, you needed a sweater. Management said it was the air conditioning, but it felt like more than that. It felt like the cold was coming from the walls themselves. There were about 30 of us working in the call center at any given time, spread out across rows of cubicles. Most people kept to themselves. You'd hear the low murmur of voices making calls, the occasional burst of laughter. But mostly, it was just quiet. Depressing. I sat in a cubicle near the back, next to a guy named Eric. He was older, maybe in his 50s, and he'd been working there for years. He was one of the few people who talked to me, though he was strange. He had this habit of staring at his computer screen without blinking, and sometimes he'd mutter to himself under his breath. I tried to be friendly, but he made me uneasy. One afternoon during a break, I asked him how he'd managed to stay at the job for so long. He looked at me with this blank expression and said, "You get used to it." "Used to what?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just turned back to his computer and kept typing. A few weeks later, something happened that I still don't understand. I was working late, finishing up some calls. Most people had already gone home, and the office was almost empty. Just me, Eric, and maybe 2 or 3 other people scattered across the floor. The lights had been dimmed. Management did that after hours to save energy, and the whole place felt different. Quieter, darker. I was in the middle of a call when my phone went dead. Just cut off mid-sentence. I looked at the screen, and it was black. I tried turning it back on, but nothing happened. I figured it was a technical issue, so I got up to go find a supervisor. That's when I noticed that Eric's cubicle was empty. His computer was still on, the screen glowing in the dim light, but he was gone. I thought maybe he'd gone to the bathroom, but something about it felt wrong. His chair was pushed back like he'd left in a hurry, and his jacket was still hanging on the back of it. I walked down the row of cubicles looking for someone, anyone. But the place was deserted. The other people who'd been there were gone. I called out, but my voice just echoed in the empty space. I went to the elevator and pressed the button. Nothing. The elevator didn't move. I tried the stairs, but when I opened the door to the stairwell, I stopped. The stairs only went up. There was no down, just a concrete wall where the downward staircase should have been. I stood there, staring at the wall, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. I'd used those stairs 100 times. They went down to the ground floor. But now, there was nothing. I went back to the office and tried to stay calm. I told myself it was some kind of prank, or maybe I was on the wrong floor. But I knew I wasn't. I recognized everything. The layout, the cubicles, the faded carpet. I walked over to the windows and looked outside. The street below was empty. No cars, no people. The street lights were on, casting pools of yellow light on the pavement, but nothing was moving. It was like the whole city had been abandoned. I heard a sound behind me and spun around. Eric was standing in the middle of the office, near his cubicle. He was just standing there, staring at me. "Eric," I said, my voice shaking. "What's going on?" He didn't answer. He just kept staring, his face expressionless. And then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, too fixed, like someone who didn't know how to smile properly. "You get used to it," he said. I backed away, my heart pounding. Used to what? He tilted his head, and for a moment I thought I saw something flicker across his face. Something that wasn't human. "This," he said. "All of this." I turned and ran. I don't know where I thought I was going. There was nowhere to go. But I couldn't stay there. I couldn't be near him. I ran down the rows of cubicles, my footsteps echoing in the empty office, and I heard him behind me. Not running, just walking, slow and steady, like he had all the time in the world. I ducked into one of the cubicles and crouched down, trying to stay quiet. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, the soft squeak of his shoes on the carpet, and then they stopped, right outside the cubicle. I held my breath, waiting, and then I heard his voice, low and calm. "You'll stay here, just like the rest of us." I squeezed my eyes shut, praying he'd go away. and after what felt like hours, I heard his footsteps retreat. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, and then I slowly stood up and peeked over the cubicle wall. He was gone. The office was empty again. I ran to the elevator and hit the button over and over, and this time it worked. The doors opened, and I stumbled inside, jabbing the button for the ground floor. The elevator lurched downward, and I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. When the doors opened, I ran out into the lobby and burst through the front doors into the street. It was night, and the city was alive again. Cars driving by, people walking on the sidewalks. Everything normal. I quit the next day, didn't give notice, didn't go back for my things. I just sent an email and never returned. I tried to find Eric online to see if he was real, but there was no trace of him. No social media, no records, nothing. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if it was real or if I had some kind of breakdown. But sometimes, when I'm at my new job, sitting in my cubicle, I'll hear footsteps behind me, slow and steady, and I'll turn around, expecting to see him standing there, smiling that wrong smile. And I think about what he said. You get used to it. When I was in college, I had a roommate named Daniel. We weren't close. We'd been randomly assigned to the same dorm room, and we coexisted more than anything. He was quiet, studious, the kind of guy who kept to himself. He'd spend hours at his desk, headphones on, working on his laptop. We'd exchange pleasantries, but we didn't really talk. About 2 months into the semester, I started noticing something odd. Daniel would leave the room at night. Not every night, but a few times a week. I'd wake up around 2 or 3 in the morning, and his bed would be empty. At first I thought maybe he was going to the library, or hooking up with someone, or just taking a walk. But it was always the middle of the night, and he'd come back an hour or 2 later, silent and pale, like he'd seen something terrible. I didn't ask him about it. It wasn't my business. But I was curious. One night I pretended to be asleep when he got up. I watched through half-closed eyes as he pulled on his shoes and slipped out of the room. I waited a few minutes, and then I followed him. The dorm was quiet, the hallways dim and empty. I stayed far enough back that he wouldn't notice me, and I watched as he walked down the stairs and out the side exit. I followed him across campus, past the library, past the student center, all the way to the edge of the woods that bordered the school. He stopped at the tree line and looked around, like he was checking to see if anyone was watching. I ducked behind a building, my heart pounding. After a moment, he stepped into the woods and disappeared. I should have gone back to the dorm. I should have left it alone, but I didn't. I followed him into the woods. The trees were thick, and it was hard to see in the dark. I used my phone as a flashlight, trying to keep the beam low so he wouldn't notice. I could hear him up ahead, walking through the underbrush, and I followed the sound. After about 10 minutes, I saw a light, a faint flickering glow coming from deeper in the woods. I crept closer, and I saw Daniel standing in a small clearing. There were other people there too, maybe 5 or 6 of them, all standing in a circle around a fire. They were wearing normal clothes, jeans, hoodies, nothing weird, but something about the scene made my skin crawl. Daniel was talking to them, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. The fire cast strange shadows on their faces, and they all looked wrong, like they were trying to imitate normal expressions but couldn't quite get it right. One of them turned and looked directly at me. I froze. I was hidden behind a tree far enough back that they shouldn't have been able to see me. But this person, this thing, was staring right at me, and then it smiled. I ran. I didn't think. I just turned and ran as fast as I could, branches whipping against my face, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I was out of the woods and back on campus. I ran all the way to the dorm, locked myself in the room, and sat on my bed, shaking. Daniel came back an hour later. He didn't say anything. He just got into bed and went to sleep, like nothing had happened. The next morning, I couldn't look at him. I tried to act normal, but every time I glanced over at him, I felt this cold, creeping dread. He seemed the same as always, quiet, focused, but I couldn't shake the image of him standing in that clearing, surrounded by those people. I started avoiding the room. I'd spend as much time as possible in the library or at friends' places, but I couldn't avoid him forever. One night I came back late, hoping he'd be asleep, but he was sitting at his desk, staring at his computer. He turned when I walked in. "Where have you been?" he asked. "Library," I said, keeping my voice casual. He nodded slowly, and then he said, "You followed me." My blood went cold. "What?" "A few nights ago," he said, "you followed me into the woods." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to deny it, but the look on his face told me it was pointless. "Why?" he asked. I was curious, I said, hating how weak my voice sounded. He stared at me for a long moment, and then he smiled. It was the same wrong smile I'd seen in the clearing. "You should have stayed," he said. "They wanted to meet you." I packed my things that night. I told the RA I needed a new room, made up some excuse about incompatible schedules. They moved me to a different dorm within a week. I never saw Daniel again. I avoided him on campus, and after that semester I heard he'd transferred to another school. I tried to forget about that night, about the clearing, and the fire, and those people. But I couldn't, because a few months later, I was walking across campus late at night, and I saw them, the same people from the woods. They were standing under a streetlight, just standing there, not talking, not moving. And when I walked past, they all turned to look at me, and they smiled. I don't go out at night anymore, not alone. And when I see groups of people standing together, too still, too quiet, I walk the other way, because I think Daniel was trying to warn me. I think he wanted me to join them, and I think, whatever they are, they're still waiting. I need to tell you about my grandmother's house. She lived alone in a small town about 3 hours from where I grew up. My parents would take me to visit her a few times a year, usually during holidays. The house was old, built sometime in the early 1900s, and it had that particular smell that old houses have. Dust and wood, and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers. I loved that house when I was little. It felt magical, with its creaky floors and narrow hallways, and the attic that was always locked. My grandmother would make me cookies and let me explore, and I'd spend hours wandering through the rooms, imagining stories. But as I got older, I started noticing things. Little things, at first, like how my grandmother never went upstairs after dark, or how she'd always close certain doors before the sun went down, or how she'd stop mid-sentence sometimes and tilt her head, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. When I was 13, I asked her about it. We were sitting in the kitchen, and she was making tea, and I said, "Grandma, why do you always close the doors at night?" She froze, her hand hovering over the teapot. For a moment, I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she turned to me, and her expression was serious. "Because some doors are meant to stay closed," she said. I laughed, thinking she was joking, but she didn't laugh back. "I'm serious?" she said. There are things in this house that shouldn't be disturbed, and as long as the doors stay closed, they stay where they are. I didn't know what to say. She'd never talked like that before. I wanted to ask more, but something about the look on her face stopped me. That night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They were coming from the hallway outside my room, slow and deliberate. I thought it was my grandmother maybe getting up for a glass of water. But the footsteps didn't stop. They walked past my door, down the hallway, and then back again, over and over, pacing. I got up and opened the door a crack. The hallway was dark, but I could see a shape moving, a figure, tall and thin, walking back and forth. I couldn't see its face. It was just a shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness. I closed the door as quietly as I could and got back into bed. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. But I could still hear the footsteps, muffled now, but constant. They didn't stop until the sun came up. The next morning, I told my grandmother what I'd heard. She didn't seem surprised. "You opened your door," she said. "I just looked," I said. She shook her head. "You shouldn't have. Once you see it, it knows you're there." "What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. She looked at me for a long time, and then she said, "I don't know. It's been here as long as I have. Maybe longer. But it doesn't hurt anyone, as long as you don't acknowledge it." I didn't sleep well for the rest of that visit. Every night, I'd hear the footsteps. Sometimes they'd stop outside my door, and I'd hold my breath, waiting. But they'd always move on, and I'd lie there, frozen, until morning. My grandmother passed away a few years ago. The house was left to my mother, but she didn't want to keep it. She put it on the market almost immediately. It took a long time to sell, over a year. People would come for viewings, but no one ever made an offer. My mother said they always had the same reaction. They'd walk through the house, and everything would seem fine. But then they'd get to the upstairs hallway, and they'd stop. They'd get this look on their face, like they'd felt something, and they'd leave without saying much. Eventually, someone bought it. A young couple, new to the area. My mother tried to warn them in her own way. She mentioned that the house was old, that it had quirks, that it might take some getting used to, but they just smiled and said they loved old houses. I wonder if they're still there. I wonder if they hear the footsteps at night, pacing the hallway, and I wonder if they've made the same mistake I did. If they've opened the door. I used to work night security at a storage facility just outside of town. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it was easy, quiet, the kind of place where nothing ever happened. My shift started at 11 and ended at 7 in the morning. Mostly I just walked the rows of units with a flashlight, checked the locks, marked things down on a clipboard. The pay was decent for what it was, and I didn't mind being alone. The facility was huge. Over 300 units spread across a fenced lot, arranged in long corridors that all looked the same. Concrete floors, metal roll-up doors, painted this industrial beige color. Fluorescent lights that buzzed too loud when they were on. During the day it was busy. People coming and going, moving boxes, renting trucks. But at night, it was just me. I'd been working there for about 5 months when I started noticing the smell. It was faint at first. I thought maybe an animal had died somewhere on the property. A rat in the walls, maybe, or something in the dumpster out back. But it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside, somewhere in the East Wing. The smell was worst near Unit 237. It wasn't constant. Some nights I wouldn't notice it at all, but other nights When I walked past that unit, it would hit me like a wall. Rotten. Sour. The kind of smell that sticks in your throat and makes you want to gag. I mentioned it to my supervisor, a guy named Carl who only worked days. He said he'd look into it. A week later, nothing had changed. I started avoiding that corridor when I could. It wasn't part of my official route anyway. I was just supposed to do a general sweep, check for anything suspicious. But one night, about 2 weeks after I first noticed the smell, I saw that the light above Unit 237 was flickering. Not burned out, just flickering. On and off, on and off. It made the whole corridor feel wrong, like something out of a movie. I stood there for a minute, watching the light. The smell was stronger than ever. I walked up to the unit and crouched down in front of the roll-up door. There was a gap at the bottom, maybe half an inch. I don't know why I did it, but I leaned down and tried to look inside. I couldn't see anything, just darkness, but the smell was coming from in there. I was sure of it. I stood back up and checked the lock. It was secure. The unit was rented under the name J. Peterson. I'd seen the name on the roster before. The account was current. No missed payments. No complaints. Just another unit. I didn't think much of it after that. I figured maybe someone was storing old furniture, something with mold or rot. It wasn't my problem. I filed a report, told Carl about the smell again. He said he'd contact the renter. I went back to my regular routine. But the next week, I started hearing something. It was subtle, a tapping sound, rhythmic. 3 taps, then a pause. 3 taps, then a pause. It only happened at night, and only in that same corridor. I thought maybe it was the pipes. Old buildings make noise. I told myself that, over and over. But the tapping didn't sound like pipes. It sounded deliberate. One night, I was walking past Unit 237, and the tapping started again. I stopped, listened. It was coming from inside the unit. I'm sure of it. I crouched down again, put my ear near the gap at the bottom of the door. The tapping was clearer now. Metallic, like someone dragging a coin across the floor. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. I stood up and backed away. My hands were shaking. I radioed Carl. Even though I knew he wouldn't answer, he was off shift. I was alone. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? There's a weird noise in a storage unit. They'd think I was insane. I didn't sleep much the next day. I kept thinking about the sound, the smell, that flickering light. When I came back that night, I brought a crowbar with me. I don't know why. I just felt like I needed something. The smell was worse. The light was still flickering, and the tapping started almost as soon as I entered the corridor. I stood in front of Unit 237 and stared at the lock. I thought about opening it. I thought about what I might find inside. And then I thought about how much I needed this job. How much I didn't want to know. I turned around and walked away. I finished my shift in the West Wing and didn't go back to that corridor for the rest of the night. The next day, I got a call from Carl. He said the renter for Unit 237 hadn't responded to any emails or calls. The account was still active. Payments were still going through, but no one had accessed the unit in over 4 months. Carl said he was going to do a welfare check. He asked if I wanted to be there when he opened it. I said no. He called me that afternoon. I could hear it in his voice before he even said anything. They'd found something. He didn't tell me what. He just said the police were involved now and that the unit was sealed off. He told me not to go near it, not to talk about it. I never asked what was inside. I didn't want to know, but I didn't need to ask. I could tell from the way Carl sounded, from the way the police spent 3 days going in and out of that unit with boxes and bags and cameras. I quit 2 weeks later. I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I walked past that corridor, I felt it. That same feeling I had when I crouched down by the door. Like something was looking back at me. Like something had been waiting. I still think about the tapping sometimes. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. I wonder if it was trying to tell me something. I wonder if I should have opened that door. But I'm glad I didn't. When I was in college, I rented a room in an old house near campus. It was cheap, which was all that mattered to me at the time. The house was split into 4 units, and I had the attic room. It was small, but it had a skylight and slanted ceilings that gave it a kind of cozy, cramped feeling. The landlord was an older woman named Mrs. Calloway. She didn't live on the property. She just collected rent and occasionally stopped by to fix things. The other tenants were quiet. I barely saw them. There was a guy on the first floor who worked nights, and a couple on the second floor who kept to themselves. The basement was unfinished and used for storage. Mrs. Calloway told me I could keep things down there if I needed to, but I never did. I didn't like going down there. It was damp and cold and smelled like mildew. Everything was fine for the first few months. I kept to myself, went to class, studied, slept. But around November, I started hearing footsteps above me. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I was on the top floor. There shouldn't have been anything above me except the roof. But the footsteps were clear, slow, deliberate, like someone walking back and forth across the ceiling. It usually happened late at night, after midnight. I'd be lying in bed, reading or scrolling on my phone, and I'd hear it. Creak, creak, creak. I mentioned it to the guy on the first floor one day when I ran into him in the hallway. He looked at me like I was crazy. He said he'd never heard anything like that. I asked the couple on the second floor, too. Same response. No one else heard it. I started wondering if it was an animal. Maybe a raccoon or a squirrel had gotten into the roof. I emailed Mrs. Calloway and told her about it. She said she'd send someone to check. A week later, a guy came by with a ladder and climbed up to look at the roof. He said there was no sign of animals. No droppings, no nests, no damage. He said the roof was fine, but the footsteps didn't stop. They got worse, actually, more frequent. And they started happening during the day, too. I'd be sitting at my desk, working on an essay, and I'd hear them. Always the same pattern. Slow, steady, back and forth, like someone pacing. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses make noise. But the footsteps didn't sound like settling. They sounded like footsteps. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The footsteps had been going on for over an hour. I grabbed the chair and stood on it so I could reach the skylight. I thought maybe I'd be able to see something. I pushed the skylight open and stuck my head out. The roof was empty. Just shingles and a chimney and the dark sky above me. No animals, no person, nothing. But as I stood there, looking around, the footsteps started again, right above me, right where I was looking. I ducked back inside and closed the skylight. My hands were shaking. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on my bed with the lights on, listening. The next day, I went to the library and looked up the history of the house. I don't know what I was expecting to find. Some kind of explanation, maybe. A story that would make sense of what I was hearing. I found an old newspaper article from the 1970s. A man had died in the house. He'd been living in the attic room, my room, and he'd fallen down the stairs. The article didn't say much else, just that he'd been found by the landlord at the time, and that his death had been ruled an accident. I told myself it didn't mean anything. People die in houses all the time. It doesn't make them haunted. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. About the footsteps, about the way they sounded like pacing, like someone who couldn't sit still, like someone who was waiting for something. I started sleeping on the couch in the common area on the first floor. I told the other tenants I was having trouble with the heating in my room. They didn't ask questions. I didn't go back to the attic except to grab clothes and books. I couldn't be up there anymore. One night, I forgot my phone charger. It was late, almost 1 in the morning, but I needed it. I climbed the stairs to the attic and unlocked the door. The room was dark. I reached for the light switch, but before I could flip it, I heard the footsteps right above me, louder than ever. And then I heard something else, a creak, not from the ceiling, from behind me, from the stairs. I turned around. There was no one there, but I felt it. That heavy, oppressive feeling you get when someone's standing too close to you, when you can feel their presence, even if you can't see them. I grabbed my charger and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't turn off the light. I just ran down the stairs and out of the house. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to calm down. I moved out at the end of the semester. I didn't tell Mrs. Calloway why. I just said I'd found a place closer to campus. She didn't seem to care. She refunded my deposit, and that was it. I never told anyone the real reason I left. I didn't think they'd believe me. I'm not even sure I believe it myself. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in bed in my new apartment, I hear it, faint, distant, like an echo, creak, creak, creak. And I wonder if I brought something with me when I left. My younger sister, Emily, went missing when she was 7 years old. I was 10. It happened in the summer, during a family camping trip in the mountains. We were staying at a campground near a lake. There were other families there, lots of kids running around. It felt safe. Emily and I were playing near the edge of the campground, close to the tree line. We were pretending to be explorers. I was the leader, and she was my assistant. We had sticks that we were using as walking sticks, and we were looking for treasure, rocks and pine cones and anything else that seemed interesting. I got distracted. I don't remember what I was doing. Maybe I was looking at something in the trees. Maybe I was talking to another kid. I just remember turning around and realizing Emily wasn't there anymore. I called her name. No answer. I walked back toward the campground, thinking maybe she'd gone back to our tent. But she wasn't there. My parents started looking. Other campers started looking. Within an hour, the park rangers were involved. Within 2 hours, the police were there. They searched for 3 days. They brought in dogs and helicopters and volunteers. They combed through the woods, checked the lake, interviewed everyone at the campground. They found nothing. No trace of her. No signs of a struggle. No footprints leading away. It was like she'd just vanished. The police said she probably wandered off and got lost. They said the woods were dense, and it was easy for a child to get disoriented. They said she might have fallen, or gotten stuck somewhere, or been taken by an animal. But they never found a body. They never found anything. My parents never recovered. My mom became obsessed with finding her. She spent years driving back to that campground, walking through the woods, putting up flyers. My dad shut down. He stopped talking about Emily. He stopped talking about much of anything. They divorced when I was 15. I moved away as soon as I could. I didn't want to be around the grief anymore. I didn't want to be reminded of that day. I built a life somewhere else. I got married. I had a daughter of my own. I tried to move on, but last year I got a phone call from my mom. She was crying. She said she'd gotten a letter, no return address, just a single sentence written in handwriting that looked like a child's. I'm still in the woods. My mom was convinced it was from Emily. She said she recognized the handwriting. She said it was exactly how Emily used to write. I tried to tell her it was a prank, someone who'd heard about the case and decided to be cruel. But she wouldn't listen. She drove back to the campground that same day. I didn't hear from her for a week. I called her over and over, but she didn't answer. I finally drove out there myself. I found her car parked near the same spot where we'd camped all those years ago. The doors were unlocked. Her phone was on the front seat, dead. Her purse was in the passenger seat, but she was gone. The rangers searched again. The police searched again. They found her 2 days later, about 3 miles into the woods. She was sitting against a tree, staring straight ahead. She was alive, but she wasn't responsive. They took her to the hospital. She didn't speak for 2 weeks. When she finally did, she only said one thing over and over. She's still there. She's waiting. The doctors said it was a psychotic break, trauma, grief, stress. They put her on medication and moved her to a facility where she could be monitored. I visit her sometimes. She doesn't talk much. But when she does, she talks about Emily, about how she saw her in the woods, about how Emily called to her, about how Emily told her to stay. I don't know what happened to my mom out there. I don't know if she really saw something, or if her mind just broke under the weight of all those years of searching. But I think about that letter, about the handwriting, about the words, "I'm still in the woods." I think about Emily, about how she disappeared without a trace, about how no one ever found her. And I think about my mom, sitting against that tree, staring at nothing. I think about what she might have seen, and I wonder if Emily really is still out there, waiting. I used to work as a home health aide. It was mostly elderly clients, people who needed help with daily tasks, bathing, cooking, getting dressed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. I liked feeling like I was helping people. One of my clients was a man named Mr. Brennan. He was in his 80s, lived alone in a small house on the edge of town. He'd had a stroke a few years earlier and needed help with mobility. I'd visit him 3 times a week, help him with meals and medication, make sure he was doing okay. He was quiet, polite. He didn't talk much, but when he did, he was kind. He had a daughter who lived out of state. She called sometimes, but she didn't visit often. I got the sense that Mr. Brennan was lonely. The house was old. It had that feeling that old houses have, like the walls were holding on to something. The furniture was outdated, the wallpaper was peeling, and there were pictures everywhere. Family photos, mostly. Mr. Brennan and his wife, his daughter when she was young. His wife had passed away a decade earlier. He kept her pictures up. There was one room in the house that was always locked. It was at the end of the hallway, next to the bathroom. I asked Mr. Brennan about it once, and he just said it was storage. He said there was nothing important in there. I didn't press. But I noticed things, little things, like how Mr. Brennan would sometimes stop in the hallway and stare at that door, or how he'd flinch if I walked too close to it, or how, on certain days, I'd hear sounds coming from inside, creaking, shifting, like someone was moving around in there. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe an animal in the walls. But the sounds were too regular, too deliberate. One day, I arrived for my usual visit and found the door to the locked room open, just a crack. I could see darkness inside. I called out for Mr. Brennan, but he didn't answer. I walked through the house and found him in the living room, asleep in his chair. I didn't want to wake him, but I kept looking back at that door. I don't know what made me do it. Curiosity, maybe, or something else. But I walked down the hallway and pushed the door open. The room was small. There was a single bed in the corner, neatly made, a dresser, a rocking chair by the window, and pictures, dozens of them, covering the walls, all of the same woman, Mr. Brennan's wife. But it wasn't just pictures. There were clothes laid out on the bed, a dress, shoes, jewelry, like someone was about to wear them. There was a tray on the dresser with a plate and a glass of water. The food looked fresh. I backed out of the room and closed the door. My heart was pounding. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to say. When Mr. Brennan woke up, I didn't mention it. I just finished my tasks and left. But I couldn't stop thinking about that room, about the clothes, about the food. The next time I visited, the door was locked again. Mr. Brennan seemed agitated. He kept looking down the hallway. He barely ate. When I asked if he was okay, he just nodded and said he was tired. I started noticing more things after that. The smell of perfume in the hallway, a faint floral scent, like something from another era. I'd hear the rocking chair creaking, even though no one was in that room. I'd see Mr. Brennan talking to himself or to someone I couldn't see. He'd set two places at the dinner table, even though it was just him. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. I thought maybe it was his way of coping with grief. People do strange things when they're lonely. But one night, I got a call from Mr. Brennan's daughter. She said he'd been taken to the hospital. A neighbor had found him, collapsed in the hallway. She asked if I could go to the house and pick up some of his things, clothes, medication, his glasses. I drove over that evening. The house was dark. I used the key Mr. Brennan had given me and let myself in. I gathered his things quickly. I didn't want to be there any longer than I had to, but as I was leaving, I heard it. The rocking chair, creaking, slow and steady. I stood in the hallway, staring at the locked door. The creaking continued. Back and forth, back and forth. I left. I didn't look back. I dropped off Mr. Brennan's things at the hospital and told his daughter I couldn't continue as his aide. I said I had too many clients, that I was overwhelmed. She understood. Mr. Brennan passed away 2 weeks later. His daughter sold the house. I don't know what happened to that room. I don't know if the new owners found anything. I didn't ask. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that rocking chair, about the creaking, about the way Mr. Brennan used to stare at that door, and I wonder if his wife ever really left. I've always been a light sleeper. Even as a kid, I'd wake up at the smallest sound. A door closing, a car passing by, the house settling. It's just how I am. So when I moved into my apartment last year, I knew I'd have to get used to the noise. It was an older building in the city, and the walls were thin. I could hear my neighbors all the time, footsteps above me, voices through the walls, the occasional argument. But there was one sound I couldn't figure out. It started about a month after I moved in. I'd be lying in bed, almost asleep, and I'd hear it. A faint tapping, rhythmic, like someone knocking on glass. At first, I thought it was coming from the window. I'd get up and check, but there was never anything there. Just the street below, empty and quiet. The tapping would stop as soon as I got up, but the moment I laid back down, it would start again. I tried to ignore it. I figured it was pipes, or the radiator, or something structural, but it didn't sound like any of those things. It sounded deliberate, like someone was trying to get my attention. It happened every night, always around the same time, between 2 and 3 in the morning, and it was always the same pattern. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps, pause. I started losing sleep. I'd lie awake, waiting for it to start. And when it did, I couldn't relax. I'd get up, check the window, check the walls, check the door. Nothing. No explanation. I mentioned it to my neighbor across the hall, an older woman named Mrs. Huang. She'd lived in the building for over 20 years. I asked if she'd ever heard anything strange at night. She looked at me for a long moment, then asked, "What kind of strange?" I told her about the tapping. She didn't say anything at first. Then she asked which apartment I was in. When I told her, her expression changed. She told me to be careful. I asked what she meant. She said the last tenant in my apartment had moved out suddenly, in the middle of the night. She said he'd told her he couldn't sleep, that something was keeping him awake. I asked her if she knew what it was. She said she didn't, but she said the tenant before that had left the same way, and the one before that. She said my apartment had a reputation, that people didn't stay long. I didn't want to believe her. I told myself it was just coincidence. But the tapping continued, and it started getting worse, louder, more insistent. And it wasn't just tapping anymore. I started hearing whispers, faint, muffled, like someone was speaking through the walls. I couldn't make out the words, but I could tell it was a voice, and it sounded close, like it was right next to me. I tried recording it. I set up my phone by the bed and let it run all night. But when I played it back the next morning, there was nothing, just silence. I tried again the next night, same thing. The sounds were clear when I heard them, but they didn't show up on the recording. I started staying at a friend's place a few nights a week, just to get some sleep. But even when I was gone, I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the tapping, about the whispers, about what Mrs. Huang had said. One night, I decided to stay awake and see if I could figure out where the sounds were coming from. I made coffee, turned on all the lights, and sat in the living room with a flashlight. I waited. Around 2:30, the tapping started. I stood up and followed the sound. It was coming from the bedroom. I walked in slowly, listening. The tapping was louder now. It was coming from the wall that separated my apartment from the one next door. I pressed my ear against the wall. The tapping stopped, but the whispers started, soft, urgent, and this time I could make out a word, help. I pulled back. My hands were shaking. I stood there for a long time, staring at the wall. Then I heard it again. Help. Me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with the lights on, waiting for morning. As soon as the sun came up, I went to the building manager and asked about the apartment next door. He said it was vacant. It had been vacant for months. He offered to show it to me. We walked over together. He unlocked the door. The apartment was empty. No furniture, no belongings, just bare walls and dusty floors. I walked through the rooms, looking for anything that might explain the sounds. There was nothing. But when I got to the bedroom, the one that shared a wall with mine, I saw it. Scratches, deep gouges in the wall, like someone had clawed at it, and words scratched into the plaster. Let me out. The building manager saw it too. He went pale. He said he'd have someone come and repaint. He said he didn't know how it got there. He said the apartment had been empty for a long time. I moved out the next week. I didn't tell him why. I just broke the lease and left. I'm staying with my friend now, looking for a new place. But I still hear it sometimes. The tapping, the whispers. And I wonder who was in that apartment. I wonder how long they were there. I wonder if they're still trying to get out. I've never told anyone this before. Not my wife, not my therapist, not anyone. I don't think I could explain it in a way that makes sense. But I think about it all the time, every day. It's been 15 years, and I still don't understand what happened. I was working as a delivery driver back then. It was a temporary job while I was between things. I'd deliver packages all over the county, mostly to residential addresses. It was easy work, mindless. I'd listen to podcasts and drive. One day, I got a delivery for an address I'd never been to before. It was out in the country, about 40 minutes from town. The GPS led me down a series of narrow roads that got progressively more isolated. Trees on both sides, no houses in sight. I almost turned around a few times, thinking I'd made a wrong turn, but the GPS insisted I was going the right way. Eventually, I came to a driveway. No mailbox, no sign, just a gap in the trees with a gravel path leading into the woods. I turned in and followed it for about a quarter mile. The trees were so thick that it was dark, even though it was the middle of the day. The driveway opened up into a clearing. There was a house there, small, old, falling apart. The paint was peeling, the porch was sagging, and the windows were covered with grime. There was a car parked out front, an old sedan covered in rust and dirt. It looked like it hadn't been driven in years. I parked and got out. The package was small, nothing heavy. I walked up to the porch and knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I was about to leave the package by the door when I heard something. A voice, faint, coming from inside the house. It sounded like someone was calling for help. I knocked again, louder this time. I called out, asked if anyone was there. The voice got louder. It was definitely someone calling for help. I tried the door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The smell hit me immediately. Rot, mildew, something worse. The house was dark. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The inside was worse than the outside. Trash everywhere. Old newspapers, empty cans, broken furniture. The wallpaper was peeling. The floor was sticky. And the smell. God, the smell. I called out again. The voice responded. It was coming from deeper in the house. I followed it down a narrow hallway. There were pictures on the walls. Old family photos covered in dust. I couldn't make out the faces. The hallway led to a door. It was closed. The voice was coming from behind it. I knocked No answer. Just the voice, muffled now. I tried the handle. It was locked. I don't know why I did what I did next. I should have left. I should have called the police. But I didn't. I kicked the door. Once, twice. On the third kick, it gave way. The room inside was small, windowless, and empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no person, nothing. But the voice was still there, louder now, echoing in the empty space. It was all around me, inside my head. Help me. I backed out of the room. My heart was pounding. I ran down the hallway, out the front door, and back to my truck. I threw the package onto the porch and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't tell my supervisor what happened. I didn't tell anyone. I just marked the delivery as complete and moved on. But a few days later, I got curious. I looked up the address. According to the county records, the property had been abandoned for over a decade. No one had lived there since the early 2000s. The last registered owner had died in the house. Alone, I never went back. I never drove down that road again. But I think about it, about that voice, about the empty room, and I wonder if I really heard it, or if it was something else, something that's still there, waiting for someone to open that door. I need to tell you about the apartment I lived in during my first year of college. It was in an old building downtown, the kind with high ceilings and radiators that clanked all night. The rent was cheap, which should have been my first clue, but I was 18 and broke, and it was mine. That felt like enough. The layout was strange. When you walked in, there was a long hallway that seemed to go on forever before it opened into the main room. The bathroom was at the very end of that hallway, past the bedroom, past the kitchen nook. I remember thinking it was inconvenient, but I got used to it. You get used to a lot of things when you live alone for the first time. The first few weeks were normal. I'd come home from classes, make ramen, stay up too late watching videos on my laptop. The building was quiet. I barely saw my neighbors. There was an older woman across the hall who smiled at me once, and a guy on the floor above me whose footsteps I could hear sometimes, pacing back and forth. But that was it. I liked the privacy. Then I started noticing the door. It wasn't my door. It was at the end of the hallway, right next to the bathroom. I'd walked past it 100 times and never really looked at it. But one night, I was brushing my teeth, and I glanced over, and I realized I didn't know where it led. I stood there with my toothbrush in my mouth, staring at this door I'd somehow never questioned. It was painted the same white as all the other doors, with the same old brass knob, but I had never opened it. I had never even tried. I told myself it was probably a closet, or maybe it led to the apartment next door, some shared storage space the landlord forgot to mention. I didn't think about it too much, but after that night, I couldn't stop noticing it. Every time I walked down the hallway, my eyes would go to that door. Every time I used the bathroom, I'd look at it while I washed my hands. One evening, I was coming home late from the library. It was past midnight, and the building was silent in that heavy way that makes you aware of every sound you make. I unlocked my apartment, stepped inside, and closed the door behind me. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard it, a knock. It was soft, 3 taps evenly spaced. It came from that door. I stopped walking. My bag slid off my shoulder and hit the floor. I stood there, frozen, staring down the hallway. The door was maybe 10 feet away. I waited. The knock came again. 3 taps. Soft, polite, patient. I should have left. I should have turned around, walked out, and called someone. But I didn't. I walked toward the door. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I was imagining it. Maybe I thought it was the pipes or the radiator or something that made sense. I reached the door and put my hand on the knob. It was cold. I turned it. It was locked. I tried again, jiggling the handle, but it didn't budge. I stepped back. The door was silent now. No more knocking. I stood there for a long time, just staring, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. Eventually, I went to bed, but I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I looked for a key. I went through every drawer, every shelf, checked the junk drawer in the kitchen, and the pockets of jackets I hadn't worn in months. Nothing. I thought about asking the landlord, but something stopped me. I didn't want to seem paranoid. I didn't want to seem like I couldn't handle living alone. A few days passed. I tried to ignore the door, tried to pretend it wasn't there, but I started having this feeling, this awareness of it, whenever I was in the apartment, like it was watching me, like something on the other side was waiting. Then it happened again. I was in the kitchen making coffee. It was early, maybe 6 in the morning, and the light coming through the window was gray and weak. I heard the knock. 3 taps. I turned off the stove. I walked down the hallway. I stood in front of the door. This time, I pressed my ear against it. I could hear breathing. It was faint, almost drowned out by the sound of my own heartbeat, but it was there, slow, steady breathing, in and out, in and out. I pulled back. I stared at the door. I didn't touch it. I went back to the kitchen, and I poured my coffee, and I left for class. I didn't come home until late that night, and when I did, I walked past the door without looking at it. But the breathing stayed in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Who was on the other side? How were they getting in there? Was it even a person? I started having nightmares. In the dreams, I'd be in my apartment, walking down the hallway, and the door would be open. Just a crack. And I'd know, with absolute certainty, that I shouldn't look inside. But I always did. And every time, I'd see the same thing. Darkness. Complete, endless darkness. And something in that darkness, something massive and patient, breathing. I'd wake up sweating, my chest tight, and I'd lie there in the dark, listening. Sometimes I thought I could hear it, even when I was awake. That slow, steady breathing just on the other side of the wall. I stopped using the bathroom at night. I started keeping a bottle in my room. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't walk down that hallway in the dark. I couldn't walk past that door. One night, I woke up at 3 in the morning. I don't know why. There was no sound, no nightmare. I just opened my eyes, and I was awake. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, and then I heard it. Not knocking this time. Scratching. Soft, rhythmic scratching, like fingernails on wood. It was coming from the hallway. I got out of bed. I don't know why I did that. I should have stayed where I was, but I stood up and I walked to my bedroom door, and I opened it. The hallway was dark. I hadn't left any lights on, but I could see the door at the end, just barely, outlined by the faint glow from the bathroom nightlight. The scratching was louder now. It was definitely coming from that door, from the inside. I took a step forward, then another. I reached the door. I put my hand on it, and I felt the vibration of the scratching through the wood. I pulled my hand back. The scratching stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the doorknob started to turn. I watched it twist slowly. until it stopped. The door was still locked, but the knob was turned as far as it would go. I could see it straining, like someone on the other side was pulling, trying to force it open. I ran. I grabbed my phone and my keys, and I ran out of the apartment. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing on the sidewalk in my bare feet, shaking. I called the landlord. It went to voicemail. I called campus security. They said they'd send someone, but it would be a while. I sat on the curb, and I waited. When the security officer arrived, I took him upstairs. I unlocked my apartment. We walked down the hallway together. He looked at the door. He tried the knob. It was locked. He asked me if I had a key. I said no. He shrugged. He said it was probably just an old closet, that old buildings make weird sounds. He said I should try to get some sleep. I didn't go back inside that night. I stayed with a friend. The next day, I went to the landlord's office. I told him I needed to know what was behind that door. He looked confused. He pulled up the floor plan on his computer. He stared at it for a long time. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. There wasn't supposed to be a door there. According to the floor plan, that space didn't exist. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway, and beyond that was the exterior wall of the building. There was no room, no closet, nothing. He said maybe it was a mistake in the layout. Maybe someone added it later and didn't update the records. But he didn't have a key. He'd never even heard of it. I moved out 2 weeks later. I broke my lease, and I didn't care. I found another place, smaller, more expensive, but it didn't have any doors I couldn't explain. I never went back to that apartment. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm trying to fall asleep, I think about that door. I think about the breathing. I think about the doorknob turning, and I wonder what would have happened if it had opened. I wonder what I would have seen, and I'm so grateful that I never found out. I used to work at a call center. It was a terrible job, the kind where you sit in a gray cubicle under fluorescent lights and make calls all day to people who don't want to talk to you. The pay was barely enough to cover rent, but I needed something while I figured out what I actually wanted to do with my life. Most days blurred together. Same script, same responses, same 30-minute lunch break eating sad sandwiches in the break room. But there was one call I can't forget. It was late in my shift, maybe 8 or 9 at night. The call center stayed open until 10, and by that time, most of the other employees had gone home. There were maybe 5 of us left, scattered across the floor, our voices echoing in the empty space. I was tired. My eyes hurt from staring at the computer screen. I was counting down the minutes until I could leave. The phone rang. I picked it up, gave my usual greeting, and waited for the response. There was silence on the other end, but not dead silence. I could hear something. A faint rustling like fabric moving, and underneath that, the sound of breathing. "Hello," I said again. "Can you hear me?" Yes, the voice was quiet, hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. It sounded male, but I wasn't sure. "Yes, I can hear you." "Great," I said, slipping into my script. "I'm calling today to talk to you about your current service plan. Do you have a few minutes to... I need help." I stopped. That wasn't the usual response. Most people just hung up or told me they weren't interested. But this was different. The voice sounded desperate, scared. "I'm sorry," I said, "but this is a customer service line for... Please." The word came out cracked, almost a whisper. "Please, you have to help me. I don't know how much time I have." My script didn't cover this. I glanced around the call center, but no one was paying attention. My supervisor had left an hour ago. I was on my own. "Sir," I said slowly, "if you're in danger, you should call 911. I can't. I tried. They won't come. They said it's not real, but it is. I know it is." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. His voice was shaking now. I could hear the fear in it, raw and real. "What's not real?" I asked, even though I knew I shouldn't engage. I should have transferred the call or hung up. But I didn't. There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing, shallow and fast. "The room," he finally said. "There's a room in my house that wasn't here before." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean I woke up this morning, and there was a door in my hallway that wasn't there yesterday. I've lived here for 6 years. I know every inch of this house. But this door, I don't remember it. And when I try to think about it, when I try to remember if it was always there, my mind just slips, like I can't hold on to the thought." I didn't know what to say. It sounded insane. But the way he said it, the sheer terror in his voice, made me believe he believed it. "Have you opened it?" I asked. "No." His voice dropped even lower. "But I can hear something inside. It sounds like someone walking. Back and forth, pacing, and sometimes," he trailed off. "Sometimes, what? Sometimes it stops, right in front of the door. Like it's listening, like it knows I'm out here." I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. The call center suddenly felt too big, too empty. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one there. "Have you tried leaving?" I asked. "I can't." His voice cracked. "Every time I try to walk to the front door, I end up back in the hallway. I don't know how. I turn around, and I'm just back, like the house won't let me leave. This had to be a prank. Someone messing with me because they were bored. But it didn't feel like a prank. It felt real, too real. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I really think you should call someone, a friend, a family member, someone who can come check on you." "There's no one." He sounded like he was crying now. "I tried calling my brother. The call won't go through. I tried calling my neighbor. Same thing. You're the only one who answered. I've been calling random numbers for hours, and you're the only one who picked up." I looked at my computer screen. The caller ID was blank. No number, no location, nothing. That wasn't normal. Every call had a number attached. "What's your name?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was barely a whisper. "I don't remember." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "You don't remember your name?" "No. I know I had one. I know I should know it. But when I try to think of it, it's just gone, like it's been erased." I couldn't breathe. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. "Where are you?" I asked. "I don't know. I thought I knew, but the windows are dark. I can't see outside. It's like there's nothing out there, just black." I wanted to hang up. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to end the call, to walk away, to forget this ever happened. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave him there, alone, terrified, even if I didn't understand what was happening. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. There was a long silence. Then, quietly, he said, "Talk to me, please. Just don't let me be alone with it." So I did. I talked to him. I asked him about his house, about his life, About anything I could think of, he answered when he could. But his responses were vague, fragmented, like he was trying to remember something that kept slipping away. He told me he thought he had a job once. He thought he had a family, but he couldn't picture their faces. He couldn't remember their names. And the whole time, I could hear it in the background. The pacing, slow, deliberate footsteps on the other side of that door. Back and forth, back and forth. "It's getting louder," he whispered at one point. "It's getting closer to the door. Don't open it," I said. "Whatever you do, don't open it." "I won't. I won't." But I could hear the doubt in his voice. The pull. Like part of him wanted to. Like something was making him want to. We talked for over an hour. The call center was completely empty by then. I was supposed to have left at 10, but I didn't. I couldn't. I stayed on the line, my phone pressed to my ear, listening to him breathe, listening to the footsteps in the background. And then, suddenly, he gasped. "What?" I said. "What's wrong?" "The door." His voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand him. "The door is opening." "No," I said. "No. Get away from it. Go to another room. Lock yourself." "I'm not touching it," he said. "I'm not doing it. It's opening on its own." I heard the creak of a door through the phone. Slow, drawn out, like something savoring the moment. And then I heard something else, a sound I can't describe. It was low and wet and wrong, like something that shouldn't exist trying to make noise. He screamed. It wasn't a normal scream. It was the sound of someone whose mind was breaking, whose body was realizing something terrible was happening and couldn't process it. It went on, and then it stopped, abruptly, like someone had flipped a switch. The line went silent. "Hello," I said. My voice was shaking. "Are you there?" "Hello?" Nothing. Just static. Then, after a moment, I heard breathing again. But it wasn't his breathing. It was too slow, too deep. And underneath it, I could hear something else. A wet, rhythmic sound, like something chewing. I hung up. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. I sat there in my cubicle, shaking, staring at the empty call center around me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Everything looked normal, but I didn't feel normal. I tried to report the call the next day. I told my supervisor what had happened. She pulled up the logs. There was no record of it. No call at that time. No number. Nothing. She looked at me like I was losing it. She suggested I take a day off, get some rest. I quit 2 weeks later. I couldn't stay there. Every time the phone rang, I'd freeze. I'd stare at it, terrified that it would be him again. Or worse, that it would be something else. Something that had found my number. I still think about that call. I think about the door opening. I think about what he saw in those last moments. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone in my apartment, I hear something that sounds like footsteps. Slow and deliberate, pacing back and forth. And I tell myself, it's just my imagination. I tell myself I'm safe. But I don't really believe it. When I was 19, I went on a road trip with 2 friends. It was summer, and we were young and stupid and wanted an adventure. We didn't have much of a plan. We just got in the car and drove, heading west, stopping wherever looked interesting. We slept in cheap motels, ate gas station food, listened to music too loud. It felt like freedom. On the 3rd day, we were driving through the middle of nowhere. It was late afternoon, the sun starting to sink. casting everything in that orange-gold light that makes the world look unreal. We hadn't seen another car in over an hour. The road stretched out flat and empty in both directions, cutting through fields and patches of scrubby trees. That's when we saw the town. It wasn't on the map. We checked, but there it was, just off the highway, a cluster of buildings and a water tower in the distance. We were low on gas, so we decided to stop. The exit was unmarked, just a narrow strip of asphalt peeling off from the main road. We took it. The town was small, maybe a dozen buildings, all old, all worn down in that way that makes you think no one's taken care of them in years. There was a gas station, a diner, a post office, a handful of houses. No people, at least, not at first. The streets were empty, the windows dark. It felt like we'd driven into a ghost town. We pulled into the gas station. The pumps were ancient, the kind you don't see anymore, with the numbers that flip manually. There was no attendant, no one, in the little booth by the road. We sat there for a minute, waiting, but no one came out. "This is weird," my friend Sarah said from the back seat. "Yeah," I agreed. "Maybe we should just keep going." But Jake, who was driving, was already getting out of the car. "We need gas," he said. "We're not gonna make it to the next town on what we have." He had a point. The tank was nearly empty. So we got out. The air was still and hot, and it smelled like dust and gasoline. I walked up to the station booth and peered inside. There was a cash register, a rack of candy bars, a calendar on the wall. The calendar was old, really old. It was open to July 1987. "Guys," I called, "I think this place is abandoned." Jake was trying the pump, but it wouldn't work. No power. He kicked it in frustration, then looked around. "There's gotta be someone here. Let's check the diner." We walked down the street toward the diner. It was called Rosie's, according to the faded sign hanging above the door. The windows were grimy, but I could see inside. Booths lined the walls. A counter ran along the back. It looked frozen in time, like someone had just walked out one day and never come back. The door was unlocked. Jake pushed it open, and we stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with the smell of old grease, and something else I couldn't identify, something sour. "Hello," Sarah called. Her voice echoed in the empty space. No answer. We walked through the diner slowly. There were plates on some of the tables, like meals had been left half-eaten. Cups of coffee, long since evaporated to dark rings at the bottom. A newspaper on the counter yellowed and brittle. I picked it up carefully. The date was August 3rd, 1987. "This is so creepy," Sarah whispered. "Why is everything from 1987? "Maybe the town died," Jake said. "People left, and no one bothered to clean it up." But that didn't make sense. The door was unlocked. The gas station had candy bars that looked relatively fresh, or at least not decades old. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The town didn't feel abandoned. It felt waiting. We left the diner and walked further into the town. There was a small park in the center, with a rusted swing set and a picnic table. Beyond that, the houses started. They were all the same style, small and square, with peeling paint and sagging porches. We passed the first few, looking in the windows, but they were too dark to see much. Then we saw the person. He was standing in the doorway of one of the houses, just standing there, watching us. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, wearing a plaid shirt and jeans. His face was expressionless. "Excuse me," Jake called, walking toward him. "We're looking for gas." Is there anyone who can help us? The man didn't respond. He just stared. His eyes were strange, empty, like he was looking at us, but not really seeing us. Sir, Jake said, stopping a few feet away. The man blinked slowly, and then he spoke. His voice was flat, monotone. You should leave. We're trying to, Jake said. But we need gas. Can you help us? You should leave, the man repeated, in the exact same tone. A chill ran through me. Something was very wrong. Come on, I said, grabbing Jake's arm. Let's just go. But Sarah was looking past us, down the street. Guys, she said quietly, there are more. I turned. She was right. People were emerging from the houses, one by one. Men, women, a few children. They all moved the same way, slow and stiff, like puppets. They all had the same empty eyes. And they were all walking toward us. We need to go, I said, louder this time. Now. We ran back to the car. The people didn't run. They just kept walking, slow and deliberate, following us. We reached the car, piled in, and Jake started the engine. It sputtered, died. He tried again. Same thing. Come on, he muttered, turning the key again and again. The people were getting closer. They were maybe 20 feet away now, a silent crowd, their faces blank. One of them, a woman in a faded yellow dress, reached out toward the car. Her hand was pale, the fingers too long. The engine finally caught. Jake threw it in reverse and floored it. We shot backward, tires screaming, and then he spun us around and we tore out of there. Back toward the exit, back toward the highway. I looked back through the rear window. The people had stopped. They were just standing in the middle of the street, watching us go. And behind them, I saw something else. The buildings were flickering like a bad signal on a TV. For just a second, I saw the town as it really was. Empty, ruined. Buildings collapsed, streets overgrown. Nothing but decay. And then it snapped back, looking normal again. And we were too far away to see any more. We didn't talk for a long time after that. We just drove. We found another town an hour later. A real town with real people and a working gas station. We filled up and kept going. We never talked about what happened. Not really. It was like we'd made an unspoken agreement to pretend it hadn't been as strange as it was. But I've thought about it a lot over the years. I've tried to find that town on maps, online, anywhere. It doesn't exist. There's no record of a town in that area. No abandoned settlements, no historical markers, nothing. It's like it was never there. But I know it was. I know what we saw. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we hadn't left, if the car hadn't started. I think about those people with their empty eyes walking toward us. I think about the way the town flickered, like it was barely holding itself together. And I wonder if we ever really left, or if some part of us is still there, driving down that empty street, over and over, forever. In college, I had a roommate named Emily. We met during orientation and decided to room together sophomore year. She was quiet, studious, the kind of person who spent most of her time in the library. We weren't super close, but we got along. She kept to herself, I kept to myself, and it worked. About halfway through the semester, I started noticing she was acting strange. She'd always been a little anxious, but it was getting worse. She stopped going to classes. She'd stay in the room all day, sitting at her desk, staring at her laptop. When I asked if she was okay, she'd just nod and say she was fine. But she didn't look fine. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. One night, I woke up around 3 in the morning. I'm not sure what woke me. Maybe a sound, maybe just instinct. I opened my eyes and looked across the room. Emily was sitting at her desk, her back to me, the glow of her laptop screen illuminating her face. She was completely still. "Emily," I whispered. She didn't respond. I watched her for a moment, and then I realized something. She wasn't typing. She wasn't moving at all. She was just sitting there, staring at the screen. I sat up. "Emily, are you okay?" Still nothing. I got out of bed and walked over to her. I put my hand on her shoulder, and she jumped, spinning around so fast it startled me. "What?" she said, her voice sharp. "You were just sitting there," I said. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." She stared at me for a moment, her eyes wide, and then she looked back at the laptop. The screen was black. Not off, just black, like it was on, but displaying nothing. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "Go back to sleep." I did, but I didn't sleep well. Over the next few days, it kept happening. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and she'd be at her desk, staring at the black screen. Sometimes I'd hear her whispering, too quiet for me to make out the words. I started sleeping with headphones in, just to block it out. Then one night I woke up, and she wasn't at her desk. I looked around the room, confused. Her bed was empty. The bathroom light was off. I checked my phone. It was just past 2 in the morning. I got up and opened the door to the hallway. Emily was standing at the end of the hall, facing the wall. She was barefoot, wearing the same clothes she'd had on earlier. She wasn't moving. "Emily?" I called softly. She didn't turn around. I walked toward her, slowly, and as I got closer, I could hear her. She was whispering, the same way I'd heard in the room. I still couldn't make out the words, but it sounded like she was having a conversation, like she was responding to someone. "Emily," I said, louder this time. She stopped whispering. She turned her head, just a little, and looked at me out of the corner of her eye. "Go back to the room," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "What are you doing out here? Go back." There was something in her tone that made me listen. I turned and walked back to the room, but I didn't close the door. I stood in the doorway and watched. She stayed there for another 10 minutes, facing the wall, whispering. Then she turned and walked back. She passed me without looking and got into her bed. She didn't say anything else. I wanted to ask her about it the next morning, but she was gone before I woke up. I didn't see her for the rest of the day. When I got back to the room that night, she was already there, at her desk, staring at the black screen. I decided I needed to talk to someone. I went to our RA and told her what was happening. She said she'd check on Emily, make sure she was okay. The next day, the RA came back and told me Emily seemed fine. A little stressed, but fine. She said Emily told her she'd been having trouble sleeping, but she was handling it. But she wasn't handling it. It was getting worse. She stopped eating. I'd leave food for her, and it would sit untouched. She stopped showering. She smelled like sweat and something else, something stale and wrong. And the whispering got louder. I could hear it even when I had my headphones in. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, walked over to her desk, and grabbed the laptop. She didn't try to stop me. I turned it toward me, and I looked at the screen. It wasn't black. There was something there. A video feed, I think, but I couldn't tell what it was showing. It was dark, just shapes moving in the darkness, and there was sound, low and distorted, like voices underwater. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it, and then I saw something move in the center of the screen. Something pale and wrong. I slammed the laptop shut and stepped back. Emily was looking at me now, her face expressionless. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "What is that?" I asked. "What are you watching?" "I'm not watching," she said. "I'm listening." "To what?" She smiled, and it was the worst thing I'd ever seen. It didn't reach her eyes to them. I left the room. I grabbed my phone and my keys, and I left. I stayed with a friend that night. I told her everything, and she said I should report it, that Emily clearly needed help. So the next day, I went to campus health services. I told them my roommate was having some kind of breakdown. They said they'd send someone to check on her. When I got back to the dorm that afternoon, there were police cars outside. My stomach dropped. I ran inside, pushed past the people gathered in the hallway, and found the RA. She looked pale, shaken. "What happened?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "Emily's gone. They can't find her. They searched everywhere." Her laptop was still on the desk, closed. Her phone was on her bed, but she was gone. No one saw her leave. The security footage showed nothing. She was just gone. They never found her. The case went cold after a few weeks. Her family came and took her things. I got a new roommate. Life went on. But I still think about that laptop, about the video feed, the shapes in the darkness, about the way she smiled when she said she was listening to them. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I hear whispering. I tell myself it's just my imagination. I tell myself Emily is out there somewhere, safe, living a normal life. But I don't believe it. I think she's still listening. I think she's wherever they are. And I think sometimes they're listening back. I've always had trouble sleeping. Even as a kid, I'd lie awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for my brain to quiet down enough to let me drift off. As I got older, I tried everything. Melatonin, white noise, meditation apps, sleeping pills. Some things helped a little, but nothing really fixed it. I accepted it as part of who I was, an insomniac. A few years ago, I was going through a particularly rough patch. I'd just ended a long-term relationship, and I was barely sleeping at all. 2, maybe 3 hours a night. I was exhausted all the time, walking through life in a fog. My work suffered. My health suffered. I was desperate. That's when I found the website. I don't remember how I found it. I think I was searching for sleep aids, natural remedies, something that might help. The website was plain, just white text on a black background. No ads, no graphics. It was called The Sleep Project. The description said it was a research study on insomnia, and they were looking for participants. All you had to do was fill out a questionnaire and download an app. The app would play a specific audio track designed to help you fall asleep. No drugs, no side effects, just sound. It seemed legitimate. There was a disclaimer about it being a clinical trial, mentions of a university I'd heard of. I figured, what did I have to lose? I filled out the questionnaire, downloaded the app, and that night, I tried it. The app was simple, just a black screen with a play button. I put in my earbuds, lay down, and pressed play. The audio started immediately. It wasn't music. It wasn't white noise. It was something else. A low hum, layered with faint tones that seemed to shift and pulse, and underneath that, something that might have been voices, but so quiet I couldn't be sure. It was unsettling at first. I almost turned it off. But then I started to feel it. A heaviness, like a weight pressing down on me. My body relaxed. My thoughts slowed. And then, for the first time in weeks, I fell asleep. I woke up 8 hours later. I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept that long. I felt amazing. Rested, clear-headed, like a fog had lifted. I used the app again that night, and the same thing happened. Deep, dreamless sleep. I was ecstatic. I told myself I'd found the solution. But after about a week, I started noticing something strange. I'd wake up in the morning with no memory of my dreams, which wasn't unusual, but it felt different. It felt like there was a gap, like something was missing. And I started having this sense of disorientation when I woke up, like I wasn't sure where I was for a few seconds. Then I started waking up in different places. The first time, I woke up on the couch. I didn't think much of it. Maybe I'd gotten up in the middle of the night and fallen asleep there. But then it happened again. I woke up in the kitchen, sitting at the table, then in the bathroom, on the floor. I had no memory of getting up, no memory of moving. It was like I was sleepwalking. But I'd never sleepwalked before. I stopped using the app for a few nights. The disorientation went away, but so did the sleep. I was back to lying awake for hours, exhausted and miserable. I told myself the sleepwalking was a small price to pay for actual rest. So I started using the app again. That's when things got worse. I woke up one morning and realized I'd lost time. It was Thursday, but the last thing I remembered was going to bed on Tuesday. An entire day was just gone. I checked my phone. There were texts I'd sent on Wednesday, conversations I didn't remember having. I'd gone to work, apparently. My coworkers confirmed it. But I had no memory of it. I panicked. I went to the doctor. They ran tests, scans, everything. They found nothing wrong. They said it might be stress, dissociation, something psychological. They recommended therapy. I made an appointment, but I didn't stop using the app. I couldn't. The thought of going back to not sleeping was unbearable. The gaps kept happening. I'd lose hours, sometimes whole days. I started keeping a journal, trying to track what was real and what I was missing. I'd wake up and find entries I didn't remember writing. My handwriting, my words, but not my thoughts. The entries were strange. They talked about places I'd never been, people I'd never met. They described dreams, but not like any dreams I'd ever had. They were too detailed, too vivid, too real. One entry said, "I walked through the gray place again. The halls go on forever. I think I saw someone, but they didn't have a face. I tried to call out, but I couldn't make a sound." Another said, "The door at the end is opening. I don't want to see what's inside, but I can't stop walking toward it." I didn't write those. I couldn't have, but it was my handwriting. I tried to delete the app. I went to my phone, found it, and pressed delete. It wouldn't delete. The button didn't work. I tried restarting my phone, but when it turned back on, the app was still there. I tried everything. Nothing worked. That night, I didn't use the app. I didn't put in my earbuds, didn't press play. I just lay there, forcing myself to stay awake. But around midnight, I heard it. Faint, but unmistakable. The audio from the app. The low hum, the shifting tones, the whisper of voices. It was coming from my phone, even though the app was closed, even though my phone was off. I threw my phone across the room. The sound stopped. I sat there in the dark, breathing hard, staring at the phone. And then I heard it again, not from the phone, from inside my head. The hum, the tones, the voices. They were in my head, playing on loop, and I couldn't make them stop. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside me. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have. When I woke up, I wasn't in my bed. I was standing in my living room, facing the wall. It was still dark outside. My phone was in my hand, the app open, playing. I don't know how long I'd been standing there. I looked at the screen. There was a message displayed, white text on black. Thank you for participating in the sleep project. Stage 2 will begin soon. I dropped the phone. I left my apartment. I went to a friend's house and stayed there for a week. I didn't take my phone. I didn't sleep. I was terrified of what would happen if I did. When I finally went back, the app was gone. Just gone. Like it had never existed. I searched for the website, but I couldn't find it. It was like it had been erased. But the audio is still there. I can still hear it, faint, in the back of my mind. And sometimes when I'm on the edge of sleep, I feel myself slipping into that gray place. The place with the endless halls. The place with the door at the end. I fight it as hard as I can. I force myself awake, but I'm so tired. And I know eventually I won't be able to fight anymore. Eventually, I'll walk through that door. And I don't know if I'll come back. My grandmother died when I was 15. She'd been sick for a long time, so it wasn't a surprise, but it was still hard. She was the kind of person who made you feel safe just by being in the room. After the funeral, my family went to her house to sort through her things. It was a small house on the edge of town, surrounded by woods. She'd lived there for as long as I could remember. I was looking through her bedroom when I found the box. It was under her bed, shoved far back against the wall. It was wooden, old, with a small brass latch. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to my grandmother, all from the same person. The handwriting was shaky, hard to read. I picked one up and unfolded it. The letter was dated 1953. It was from someone named Alice. I didn't recognize the name. Alice talked about how much she missed my grandmother, how she wished they could see each other again. She talked about the house, about the woods, about how lonely it was. The tone was strange, desperate. At the end, she wrote, "Please come visit. I'm still here. I'll always be here." I read through a few more. They were all the same. Alice, writing to my grandmother, begging her to visit. The letters spanned decades. The last one was dated 3 years ago. I brought the box downstairs and showed it to my mom. She looked through the letters, frowning. "I don't know who Alice is," she said. "Your grandmother never mentioned her. Maybe an old friend?" I suggested. Maybe. But she looked uneasy. We took the box home with us. I kept reading the letters. The more I read, the stranger they seemed. Alice never mentioned leaving the house. She never talked about other people, about a job, about a life outside those woods. It was like she was trapped there, waiting. A few weeks later, I went back to my grandmother's house. My parents were selling it, and they asked me to help clean it out. I was in the attic, going through boxes, when I found a photo album. I flipped through it, looking at pictures of my grandmother as a young woman. And then I saw her. Alice. She was in one of the photos, standing next to my grandmother. They were both smiling, their arms around each other. On the back, in my grandmother's handwriting, it said, "Alice and me, summer 1952. I stared at the photo. Alice looked young, maybe 20. She had dark hair and pale skin, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something off about the photo, something I couldn't quite place. And then I realized the background, the house behind them. It wasn't my grandmother's house. It was another house, deeper in the woods. I recognized it. I'd seen it before, years ago, when I was a kid. My grandmother had taken me on a walk through the woods, and we'd passed it. It was abandoned, half collapsed, windows broken. I'd asked her who lived there, and she'd said, "No one." She'd said we should stay away from it. I took the photo and went downstairs. I asked my mom if she knew anything about the house in the woods. She shook her head. Your grandmother never talked about it. But I couldn't let it go. That night I went into the woods. I brought a flashlight and my phone. I followed the path I remembered from childhood, and after about 20 minutes, I found it. The house was worse than I remembered. The roof had caved in on one side, and the porch was rotting away. The windows were dark, covered in grime. It looked like no one had been near it in years. But as I got closer, I saw something that made me stop. The front door was open, not broken, not hanging off its hinges, just open, like someone had left it that way. I should have turned back. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave, but I didn't. I walked up to the porch, careful to avoid the weakest boards, and I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust. The floor creaked under my feet. I shined my flashlight around. The inside was gutted, furniture covered in mold, wallpaper peeling off in strips, holes in the walls. It was a ruin, but it didn't feel abandoned. It felt occupied. I walked further into what might have been a living room. There was a fireplace, an old couch, a table, and on the table, I saw something that made my stomach turn. Letters, dozens of them, stacked neatly. I walked over and picked one up. It was addressed to my grandmother. I opened it. The handwriting was the same shaky script from the letters in the box. It was from Alice, but the date was recent. 2 weeks ago, I dropped the letter. This was impossible. Alice would have to be in her 90s by now. And even if she was still alive, why would she be living here in this ruin? I heard something behind me, a creak like a footstep. I spun around, shining my flashlight. There was no one there, just the empty room, the shadows stretching long. "Hello?" I called. No answer, but I heard it again. Another creak, from upstairs this time. I should have run. I should have gotten out of there as fast as I could, but I didn't. I walked to the stairs. They were steep and narrow, and they groaned under my weight. I climbed slowly, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The upstairs hallway was short, with 2 doors on either side. All of them were closed, except one at the very end. It was open, just a crack. I walked toward it, my heart pounding. I pushed the door open. The room was small, almost empty. There was a bed, a chair, and a mirror on the wall, and sitting in the chair facing away from me was a woman. She was old, ancient. Her hair was white and thin, her back hunched. She was wearing a dress that might have been pretty once, decades ago. She didn't move. She didn't turn around. "Alice?" I whispered. She didn't respond. I took a step closer. I could see her reflection in the mirror now, and what I saw made me stop breathing. Her face was wrong. The skin was gray, sunken, stretched too tight over the bones. Her eyes were open, but they didn't blink. They didn't move. She looked dead. but she was sitting upright, like she was waiting. I backed away. I turned and ran. I flew down the stairs, out the door, into the woods. I didn't stop running until I reached my grandmother's house. I locked the doors, turned on all the lights, and I sat there, shaking, until morning. I told my mom what I'd seen. She didn't believe me. She said I'd imagined it, that the house was abandoned, and I'd scared myself. But I knew what I'd seen. I looked into it. I found records, old newspaper articles. Alice was real. She'd lived in that house with her parents in the 1950s. They'd died in a fire. The house had been abandoned ever since. There was no record of Alice after that. No death certificate, no marriage license, nothing. It was like she'd just vanished. But she didn't vanish. She's still there, in that house, in that room, sitting in that chair, waiting. I don't know what she's waiting for. Maybe for my grandmother. Maybe for someone else. But she's there. I never went back. I never told anyone else. But sometimes, late at night, I think about her. About the letters she kept writing year after year to someone who never came. I think about her sitting in that room, alone, for decades. And I wonder if she knows. I wonder if she knows she's been dead all along. Silence settles in after the last story. Not an uncomfortable silence, just a stillness, the kind that wraps around you when it's very late and the world outside your window has gone quiet. You're still here, still listening. Maybe you're close to sleep now. Maybe you're already drifting. But before you go, I want you to think about something. We spend a third of our lives asleep, a third of our existence handed over to something we don't fully understand. We close our eyes and we let go. We trust that we'll wake up in the same place, in the same body, in the same world. But what if we don't? What if, somewhere in the dark, something else slips in? What if the version of you that wakes up isn't quite the same as the one that fell asleep? You wouldn't know, would you? It would feel like you. It would remember your life. But it wouldn't be you. Not completely. Just something wearing your face, living your life. And you'd be somewhere else, lost, forgotten, still dreaming in a place you can't escape. Sleep well.